Lepel, Madame le greffier.
Monsieur le Sénateur Gorst,
Présent.
Monsieur le Sénateur Farnham, Madame le Sénateur Ferguson, Monsieur le Sénateur Lafondre,
Présent.
Madame le Sénateur Valois,
Present.
Monsieur le Sénateur Moore.
Présente.
Sorry. Monsieur le Sénateur Pallet. Monsieur le Sénateur Mezek. Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Hélier.
Présent.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Sauveur. Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Brelade.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Grouville.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de la Trinité.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Pierre. Monsieur le Connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Clément.
Présent.
Madame le Député Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le Député Southern. Madame le Député de Grouville.
Présente.
Monsieur le Député Lewis.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Tadier.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Higgins. Monsieur le Député Masson.
Présent.
Madame le Député Pinel.
Présente.
Monsieur le Député de Saint-Martin.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Madame le Député Dublé. Monsieur le Député Labbé.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Wickenden.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député de Saint-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Truscott.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Young.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Ash.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Morel.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Guida.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député de la Trinité.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Madame le Député Lehegara.
Présente.
Monsieur le Député Ayer.
Présent.
Madame le Député Pershaw. Monsieur le Député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le Député Alves.
Présente.
Monsieur le Député Pamplin.
Présent.
Madame le Député Gardner.
Présente.
Monsieur le doyen.
Notre soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait le ciel et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et la puissance de la terre, pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée, nous donne de conseils et de prudence d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, de les conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, que toute leur délibération est accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussisse au bien de tous du peuple qui ont de plus de commettre à leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions, au nom et par les mérites de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous enseigne à t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite en la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car à toi est le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Monsieur le Sénateur Farnham.
Présent.
Madame le Sénateur Ferguson.
Excusez.
Monsieur le Sénateur Pallet.
Présent.
Monsieur le Sénateur Mezek.
Excusez.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présente.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Excusez.
Monsieur le député Higgins,
Excusez.
Madame le député Dublé.
Malade.
Vous jurez que Madame le député Dublé est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux États sans exposer sa santé. Madame le député Perchard.
Malade.
Vous jurez que Madame le député Perchard est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux États sans exposer sa santé. Simplement non, Monsieur le Président.
Législation constituée. Members will have seen that there was a supplementary order paper circulated yesterday evening with an urgent oral question from Deputy Pamplin in relation to COVID-19. Deputy Pamplin's asked that the question be taken after lunch as the first item of business after the lunch adjournment, and the bailiff has agreed to that. So that question will be dealt with at 2:15 today. So we'll continue this morning with the debate on the government plan. And at the adjournment last night, the third amendment from Deputy Southern has just been read. So, Deputy Southern.
Thank you, sir. And I thank members of the Chamber of the Assembly who voted for the last night. And I always wonder where to start. So I'm going to start on this one, since it's a while since we heard what the content is, with the words and the reaction of the ministers, Council of Ministers. So we talk about section 1, except that the proposed transfers from the health insurance fund to the consolidated fund shall be reduced to £0 in 2022 in each case, and that the proposed transfer from the consolidated fund to the technology fund be reduced to £7 million in 2022. The Council of Ministers reacts by that, saying they oppose part 1 of the amendment. Part 1 is actually just tidying up, isn't it? If you transfer funds to spend, then you must make a matching saving elsewhere. So I don't have too much problem dealing with that. In the second part, we talk about except that on page 169 of Appendix 3. After the words worth of expenditure, there shall be inserted the words eligibility for the health access scheme shall be expanded to include all those ordinarily resident in the islands by 2023, with a proposed funding mechanism to be included in the 2023 government plan, in addition to any further changes to Appendix 3 identified as required by the Council of Ministers. Here's the meat of the proposition. What I'm proposing is to expand the health access scheme to encompass all of our population. I believe that's the way we have inevitably sooner or later to go, in order that we make healthcare in this island affordable to all. And my proposal is that we match what is currently in place since 2021 and expand it further, and make sure that a proper funding mechanism is put in place. And it's also, any proposition I bring, I try and put a date in there so we know what we're talking about. So we're talking about making healthcare affordable, accessible, and as soon as possible. So here we are, another example of ministers trying to kick the can down the road. I'm saying no, by 2023, I want you to have this up and running, not 24 or 25 or 27 or sometime in the distance, but 2023. We could do it. It's a political decision and an economic one, but political essentially, so that we got affordable healthcare in the island. The ministers strongly opposes part 2 of the amendment. So what's the difference between opposes and strongly opposes? I haven't had one of those for a while. The reaction sort of is that it's various. At the top of the scale, final notch, is a proposition of mine is dangerous. And then we get strongly opposes and opposes, or in this case, talking about the third part of the amendment. And here I have some joy. The Council of Ministers confirms that the role of the Health Insurance Fund in providing medical benefits and pharmaceutical benefits and contracts provided for under the health insurance law will continue during the health and services review of health costs and additional health access schemes. So at least we should be able to get to part 3, which it recognises that the health insurance fund needs to be supported. They're not opposed by the ministers. And I'm thinking about what's this strong strong opposition, what it's about. And it's about a new funding mechanism, because it will cost something. And I've got the figures in there. I think the overall cost initially will be some £10 million extra on the bill we currently have for primary healthcare. Brought forward in 2023. Whereas the ministers say the Health and Social Services Minister will undertake a wider health economic review during 2022 to inform funding options for increased health care costs or any potential new health access schemes to be brought forward in 2023 or the government plan of 2024-27. So already they're talking about 27, I'm talking about 2023. Let's get on with this. We can afford it. They further say it would be irresponsible of the States Assembly to agree to the extension of the existing health access scheme to the entire population with very little understanding of the impact of providing a universal scheme and associated costs. Well, I've done the associated cost. We don't have to be too wary about that. So the central issue is that the ministers appear to wish to shrink the health insurance fund, run it down to 0 or next to 0 over the next few months. And this is part of a reaction to COVID, which put us in very deep financial waters. So the ministers have looked around for funds they can raid in order to keep things going and have come up with 2 propositions, which we're dealing with here. And on page 171 of the government plan, it says about the Social Security Reserve Fund. The Social Security Reserve Fund holds the balances built up in the Social Security Fund and is a key way in which we are managing the impact of the ageing population on future pension costs. Some of the assets in the Reserve Fund are proposed to be utilised to help the government manage the extreme financial pressures it is currently facing. A transfer of £55 million was approved by the Social Security Minister during 2020, and further transfers from the Reserve Fund estimated at up to £263 million will be required during the period 2021 to 2023 to support the ongoing payment of pensions and benefits. So this is a big scale raid of the funds. 263 million total taken out of the fund. One looks at that, but one sees that the Social Security Reserve Fund has something like £2.1 billion. So one can look at that raid and say, on balance, probably effective and probably justifiable. And the fund can take it. That doesn't close the Social Security Reserve Fund. That puts a little dent in it, but that's all. To apply the same argument to the health insurance fund is absolutely absurd. And let's have a look at how the HIF fund works. The health insurance fund receives 2% of Social Security contributions collected under the Social Security Jersey Law 1974. A panel examining the health insurance law advised that it very strictly prescribes how the HIF fund is to be used. The most significant expenditure from the fund is the pharmaceutical benefit, which pays for drugs and the prescription of them, and medical benefit, which pays a subsidy of £20.28 to reduce the cost of GP consultations in primary care. And here's the start of the rub. £20.28 paid to GPs per consultation. That sum has not been changed for a decade. It stayed static, no increase at all, not even in line with inflation. We've just ignored it. £20.28. That's the only subsidy GPs are getting, by and large. And how do you think it makes our GPs, who are quite proud of the service they can administer, deliver, how do you think it makes them feel that they've been ignored for the past decade? It makes them feel absolutely awful and disrespected. So the first question the ministers have to ask is, what have you been doing that you have frozen medical benefits at some time in the past, 10 years back, and not increased it? How can you expect that to continue? Not only that, members will note that the provision of the health insurance law tightly controls the way in which the HIF can be used, thus ensuring it is ring-fenced for primary care. It is not to throw at a fund such as digital, which is classically where funds disappear. Computing, AI, digital. This is an area where actually, I would argue, dangerous to start throwing money at that, but not to primary care. Despite over 50 years of success in delivering first-class health services in primary care, the Minister has decided that the health insurance fund is to be phased out in a relatively short timescale. Members will note that these proposals ignore the requirement to ensure that the fund is ring-fenced for primary care. This is the end, it seems to me, of the way we've been doing things for a while, and we're going to, the ministers have made up their mind, we're going to change it radically without having examined what the future might look like. As I put in my report, the minister has been convinced that the ring fence can be ripped down to allow the HIF to be used for changes in all aspects of the health model, including introduction of digital systems and the notorious sink or runaway budget overspends. In 2022, a full review of future health costs across all areas will be completed, and this will support future plans for a sustainable model for health funding. So here's the big error. Ministers saying we can do without a major change on this. Oh, by the way, I haven't done the research, I haven't done the report, I haven't done the investigation as to how we should best do that. suggests that we can only do this if we deliberately allow the HIF to be run down to just £48 million or 1 year's income is reckless, I believe. The Minister's words describe a full review of all areas, but the reality is that the proposals to remove a total of £44.3 million from the HIF between 2021 and 2025 will effectively close down the fund, leaving it with barely 1 year's reserve. The Minister then says on page 177 of the proposed government plan, states that a key barrier to long-term progress is the split funding and responsibility between HIF and HCS, departmental budget. This split funding will also be addressed and the wider health cost and in the wider health cost and funding model review. Next question that the Minister then has to ask then, surely, is can you tell us what the problem is there? What is the problem with running two funds? Why can't you cope with that? It's not explained. If the Minister could come up with a reason that made sense, perhaps members might feel that it was safe to proceed with running down the HIF. Otherwise, I would argue not. And we're back to the big problem that we've tried to deal with, but failed to deal with, which is that simply the cost of healthcare on this island, such as a consultation with a GP for the majority who don't have the health access scheme, for the majority of people, is of the order of £45 and creeping upwards as we deliberate today. I'm hearing £47, £48, depending on the practice. And that means that the healthcare model that we're so proud on developing cannot deliver. The evidence is still there. The evidence of approximately 30,000 visits to the emergency department in 2018, not classified as emergencies requiring hospital care. People can't afford to go to their GP. They pile into the hospital. It's still happening. Until we can bring down costs, we will not succeed in reducing the inequality and improving healthcare for all. We have done it for some, the health access scheme, which was a compromise position brought by the Minister in 2021, means that those who are receiving income support or pension plus are able to receive the care they need at reduced rates. With children, and this is particularly important, with children in income support households receiving surgery appointments for free. This new scheme is a great advantage, but it only targets a few people. And it targets them relatively efficiently because the income support means test is clearly laid down and easy to administer. So with those available who access Pension Plus. The clear barrier there. However, that means that it gets to something like somewhere between 11 and 12,000 people, individuals, including children. There are many other groups. Though that group is financially vulnerable. There are also groups who are clinically vulnerable with multiple problems and socially vulnerable, and they're not touched. And that includes children in general. The demand on the HIF and the demand for medical care will continue to grow. The elderly, for example, many of whom will have an increased need for medical treatment as they age. That includes me and you, many of people in this room, indeed. Those with chronic or multiple health conditions, children who have the right to access under the United Nations Convention. And there'll be significant numbers, there always is with a means test, significant numbers of people just about managing families, just about managing who are just below the threshold. And for those families, often enough, £45 for a hospital visit is something that puts them in hardship. Absolutely clear. Could we expand the scheme to include all of these people? I believe we should. And the key to delivering something for all is that there's not necessarily a means test. A means test is difficult, bureaucratic to administer. The way forward, I believe, and that's what I propose in my proposition, is that we do away with the means test and make this a universal benefit. This would be, I believe, the single most effective way of improving people's standard of living and their income equality that we could possibly do. And I would hope that this Assembly would do that. I'd like to finish by referring to a set of notes which cover a conversation I had with a GP recently, who says the following. When I met with our chief executive, our proposal was the HIF should be topped up to provide a notional extra £5 million per annum for primary care service. This based on the fact that the HIF is in fact a hypothecated fund put in place for this purpose. And prior to recent raids on it, was already forecast to be exhausted by something like 2035. The principles outlined, this GP says, were completely in line with that of the Jersey Care model: education, care pathways, better access for diagnostics, governance, IT investment, and out-of-hours support, but notably included funding for patients, funding for recruitment and retention, and for multidisciplinary care and associated infrastructure. Our GPs want to cooperate in a new scheme. However, they are not prepared to keep on accepting that a grant mere benefit of £20.28 is sufficient for them to rein in their costs. And what it will produce is an inferior system whereby people are paying, as I say, the best part of £50 to see their doctor. Now, here's a major criticism that many GPs will make. The JCM has as yet failed to identify how the widely publicised funding of care in the community will occur. Notably, how funding will follow patients from outpatient setting to the community, and how their care will be both provided and financed. So for the moment, there is no clear way forward on the Jersey Care model, and there could be. We need to be talking to the GPs. It's not happening. It gets worse. Currently, general practice, as it is currently configured, as doctor says, is only just about coping due to retention and recruitment problems. 3 practices have had to close their lists, representing approximately 30% of the available GP workforce. We are now at approximately 65 whole-time equivalent GPs per 100,000 people, which is below that of Scotland and only just above England, both of which have ratios that are much lower than those in the majority of Western Europe. In these latter two jurisdictions, multidisciplinary care and associated infrastructure were both incentivized, and there were many more additional healthcare personnel than in Jersey. So other people have got it right. We are still waiting on what's the way forward. Despite our population growing, the number of consultations in general practice has remained fairly constant at or around 350,000 per year. And so we estimate that although patients want value for money and cover a number of issues when they present to us, there is also an unmet need. Our 3.5 consultations per head of population per year compares unfavorably with that in the UK of approximately 8 per year with GPs or related healthcare professionals. Consistent with my proposal today, we need money to help fund patients who are having to pay increasing amounts to support a modernised primary care infrastructure, which, unlike the government, we have already put in place without increasing fees above RPI. However, we cannot afford to allow this to reduce the money flowing to practices further, as diminished investment will simply add to the recruitment and provision and service problems. We can barely meet patient need, and with 14 or 15 retirements planned for the next 3 years, few are queuing up to practice in Jersey. The aspirations of the JCM and the basis on which the smaller than originally planned hospital is predicated are surely doomed to failure. So, no longer, as I often used to say, is this island too expensive for teachers, too expensive for nurses. It's actually too expensive for GPs. Our entire structure is at risk unless we act now, I believe. In the final paragraph, GP says, we are in a global market with a general shortage of healthcare personnel, and we have to make Jersey attractive to live. At present, GP salaries are very similar to those in the UK, but does not include £1.4 million in the pension pot. The cost of housing for even a 3-bedroom family-sized house is also exorbitant when one compares with our nearest competitor in the UK. If we are not able to compete financially, then we shall see excellent standard of GP service that has been provided to date ebb away in short order, and with it the protection against overuse of more expensive hospital services. Oh, it has to provide. The picture is dire. We put our health service and our primary care, especially, at peril. This proposition says that we should maintain what we have now, whilst we have this review, this wide-scale review of our health provision. And it says we should do that as soon as possible. I urge members to support this proposal.
Is the third amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Deputy Mott.
Thank you, sir. And I'd obviously like to give Deputy Southern some good news, and he's absolutely correct. We are supporting part 3 of his amendment because he seems to be implying something that we're not going to do, but it doesn't say don't do it. So we are literally happy to support that. Part 1 seems to be suggesting to hold back 13 million this year to pay for the cost of the first year. and take it from the technology fund. But what it doesn't do is doesn't explain how we're going to pay for it in future years, because what we've learned, I stepped in to do the health access scheme as Social Security Minister for a year because we had promised the Assembly, and we had some great discussions, some really good tough negotiations with GPs, and we got to the point where you pay £12 per visit. Now that includes everything. You're not surprised if you need a blood test, you need a referral, whatever you need, that's included. And if you're under 16 and under 17, you pay the £12 as well. It only started practically a year ago this week, sir, and we're now analysing if it did actually do what everyone thought it would do, and that's hopefully make more people go to the GP, because we want people to go to the GP not only when they're ill, but for preventative reasons. So it started. It's a means-tested scheme that we run in Jersey, like a long income support, and these people are already means-tested. But what Deputy Southern wants to do now, he wants to expand the scheme, sir, to the whole 108,000 people in Jersey, rich, middle income, etc., because he hasn't quite worked out who he really wants to help. He says on page 5 of his own report, there's about 22,000 people that might need extra help. I'm not denying that, sir. We're going to do this review, and we should do this review, and we should target it correctly. We should target the money correctly. The deputy seems to say I can, or the new council of ministers must run very quickly, magic up a new tax, because it ain't a new funding stream, identifying no funding streams. Said this round com, it can't be done. We can't stretch the purse anymore. We need to identify a new tax. It needs to be passed in this assembly. It needs to be started to be collected late next year, to be paid out in 2000, well, probably collected in 3 if he gets part 1. Because then we need to cover it from 2004 onward. A new tax. So who are you really helping? Oh, you can pay £12 for your doctor, but they're going to tax you more. Oh, I'm not sure if that's real help, sir. But the fundamental of this, sir, is it throws out every qualifying rule. It's even better than the health access, the health scheme. You have to be on the island 6 months. You get a small med ben, which is the £20.28. Goes to your doctor, so it brings you your costs to the GP down. But what the deputy is now saying is everybody on the island should be invested in this very expensive benefit. We refute the 10 million. It's between 12 and 15 million it will be to start. GP's visits have been depressed over the past year or two because of COVID. There was 4 months taken out where we paid for different things because they worked for the health minister. Absolutely right, did an absolutely fantastic job. But I'm the Minister of Income Support. I'm the minister who either has means-tested benefits or benefits that are paid in. Now, which one is this? Because I took over income support, income support came in from the parish welfare scheme. Because the public out there have always accepted 5 years is the sort of rule of thumb. Now, if this is not going to carry on, there was other intimates yesterday, sir, questions, sorry, it was Tuesday. Well, that was yesterday. It was even Monday question time about, the Children's Commission report on the legislative gaps. And I'm not paraphrasing, the Children's Minister thinks that every child on the island should receive benefits and housing rights so their parents can live in a good house and have enough money to look after them. I'm not saying that's wrong, sir. I'm just saying I inherited the scheme we have, and everyone accepts. You come to the island, you find out the rules, and you do not get anything until you've paid in for 5 years. Let me put it in comparison, sir. Housing benefits cost us 30 million a year approximately. Now, most of those people have been here 5 years or 10, because you've got to have the housing qualifications, but we do help with unqualified rental, we do. And that costs us 30 million. This scheme, a swoop, will cost us between 12 and 15 million to help every person on the island, even those people that Reform didn't like yesterday. those big bag landlords, those 2-1Es, those very rich people. Because they're just too lazy, sir. And here we go, sir. Here we go, sir. Oh, here we go, sir. They cannot keep quiet. So outrage. It's sometimes, sir, you wish that when people give it out, they could take it, but no. I was going to go and sit somewhere else, but here we go, sir. Can you tell them not to keep talking when I'm trying to talk?
I think you made your feeling that you'd like to be uninterrupted entirely clear, Deputy, and you're entitled to speak without interruption, of course. But let's move on from this and carry on with the speech, and I'm sure people will not make up.
I hope you're sure, sir. Thank you. Thank you for your intervention, sir. This is a complete move away from our system. We haven't got the money. It is a new tax. Deputy Southern didn't like to say, he did admit in his opening speech, revenue will have to be raised. Reform have known what they wanted to do for the last 2 years. They've always come about something, a funding stream for doctors and this. Where is it? What does it look like? Senator Mesick said they didn't like the last one, sir, because it was unfairly targeted at the poor. Or was it Middle Jersey? It was one of the two, sir. But then, you know, come up with something better. But the scheme that the health minister and the funding review was going to take all this into account. But again, if you say tomorrow you're going to all have £12 doctors, and the doctors are not, I mean, nobody's consulted with the doctors. Deputy Southern's had a coffee with a doctor. They're not biting the hand off of this scheme. They do it for low income, sir. And that was, as I say, because we did a very, very tough negotiation. We got the deal for the people. With children, we could have done half-price. No, do children free. And so if you bring this scheme in, all children in Jersey have got to be free. Another argument, sir. Again, will have to be funded. This, sir, really is not the end of the HIF. The HIF needs to be reviewed. We've always had a pot of money over here doing something. We have the new health access, the new Jersey care model. We want GPs to do more. We want to work better with GPs. We want them to do lots more in their surgeries with practice nurses, etc., etc. They know what we want. We know what they want, and it will cost money. But why would you have a little stream over here saying that can only do this and this can only do that? So be very, very clear what Deputy Southern is proposing. You heard him mention the UNT rights of the child, and, you know, told you where the Children's Commission wants to go. She wants to, everyone basically scrap our local rules. That was mentioned by Senator Mesick and Senator Moore to the Chief Minister in question time. When are you going to implement those legislative gaps? That's what they are. But I think the people of Jersey need a real consultation on this. If you want to start giving an ordinary resident, and that's someone who comes off the plane today or the boat and says, I'm living here now, that is an ordinary resident. And then you're going to say to the rest of the population, or some, because tax is what it is, and you're going to pay for that, but you'll get a cheaper doctor as well. Many will say, well, I like going to my doctor. I like my doctor. They see him when I like, and I can afford to pay that. I'm not saying those just above managing, and if COVID hadn't come in, we were there. We were looking at that next tranche, and we couldn't work it out last year. So the health minister come to me and said, what can we do? I said, we can do this scheme, we can do it for income support, and we'd do this, and took it over, and we got there. I think with a week to spare. I think Deputy Southern had asked the Assembly to implement by the end of last year. But it's not for cheap. But it is targeted. We know these people. Means tested is not that hard. We do it. Deputy Southern seems to say we shouldn't means test now. So there should be good benefits to everybody. But this is the start of the slippery slope, sir. It's a very lazy proposition. Deputy Southern has done 2 sides of A4 and says the 22,000 people probably need more help, or actually I think it is 22 in total with people I'm already helping, and then went, oh, give it to everybody. I can't work it out, and I've got to probably lodge this, sir, and I've got to get it in, and I'll make the argument in my speech. He's made no idea, sir, where the money's coming from. Somebody will pay. The hard-working people of Jersey that don't know today that they might be just saying to everybody, You've come to Jersey and you're going to get a free doctor, but it's going to cost somebody on the island £15 million. I urge, and it is urge people not to support this, Deputy Southern, because it's ill thought through. It will cost a lot of money. Somebody's got to pay, and you're not targeting the right people because you've just said everybody, and everybody definitely doesn't need it. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Would anyone else like to speak on the amendment? Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. And I'm pleased to follow the Minister. And I see the Minister in the Assembly. A rare breed. There we go. So I'll follow that speech. Let's look at this proposition. This is about expanding access to GPs at an affordable price for everybody on this island. Yes, that is exactly what it's about. So let's look at the impact of that. There's a reality to this. First of all, there are families that don't fall into the income support bracket because that is such a low bracket that actually they are working incredibly hard. They are just about making ends meet. They're just that middle Jersey that's coping, that's getting by, that's paying high rent, that's paying high prices for everything. And when they go to the GP, it can have a significant effect on their income that week. And lo and behold, if they get something they have to repeatedly go back to the GP, those costs mount up hugely and very quickly. So that's not just those at the lowest income bracket, those people who are demonized by the Alliance Party for being in that low income bracket and told they, but anyway, let's not go back to that horrendous comments that were made previously in this Assembly. So that's people, real people in Jersey who this proposition, this amendment will impact positively. And us as an Assembly, we are here to improve the lives of exactly those people. And let's look about the impact of that. Let's look about a more subtle impact. And I challenge people in this Assembly and on this. And I make a confession myself. It certainly fits me. I don't go to the doctor very often because I don't want to, because it's expensive, because I'm tight, effectively. And my wife says to me, stop complaining and go to the doctor. And I say, oh, I'm okay. And she'll say, eventually she'll say, if you don't stop complaining and go to the doctor, I'll take you myself like a child. And I'll say, okay, I'll go to the doctor. And the last time I went, I had to have blood tests and it cost me £64. £64. And not only that, but the bad news was that I got to improve my lifestyle was sent to me by text. That really hurt. And I've got to go back and have another test and prove that I've improved my lifestyle. And that's going to cost me another £64. And that hurts. That really hurts. But that's the reality. That's the reality of the way our GP system works. Now, I'm really pleased with my GP. They're fantastic. I can go, and you're right, you can get an appointment and you pay. But the reality of a successful primary care system, sorry, let's say that again, because this is really serious point of this. The reality of a successful primary care system, which is what the care model is going to be based on, if it's going to work. And I have no problem with that care model. Let's get people help early so they don't get worse. Their lives will improve. They will be more successful in their lives and they will not suffer through illness because we can deal with it. And then people like me who suddenly have a wake-up call and say, stop eating rubbish and get some exercise, man, will actually do it earlier. It's a really good thing to do. But so that requires access to GPs. And what Deputy Southern has done, and what I've got to say, I object to this phrase, lazy, about somebody who has spent virtually their entire career in this Assembly trying to improve the lot for people in terms of access to GPs and their living standards. And forget about this personality assassination that goes on at times in this Assembly. I'm not interested. We're not interested in that type of politics. We're interested in policy and what we can do to help the people of Jersey. That's why we're here. And I'm proud of that. And I think other people are starting to see it. I think other people are starting to follow suit, which is a huge move on for this Assembly. But so what we need to do is we need to look at the real lives of people here. This is saying, do not wait until 2027, I believe it is, before anything really happens. That is 3 years of many people not going to the doctor, not accessing the doctor, and getting worse. And this is really difficult to calculate, but let's think about that. By the time some of those people get worse and need more healthcare, which is more expensive, we are not only throwing money down the drain in terms of the amount of healthcare that is needed to be provided, but people's lives are getting worse. They are getting iller. They are getting worse. So what we need is a system here where we can access GPs. And let me point out a massive contradiction in what was just said and what comes through from some members of this assembly. But this is not targeted. What about those with loads of money? They can pay for it. They don't have to have a £12 access. But one and the same time, oh, we're going to have a new tax, are we? We cannot change the tax system to make it more equitable. We cannot lift the cap on social security contributions, which are more than a decent way to do things. And he's talking about equity for those who can pay. And certainly if I was in that bracket, I think, okay, that's fair enough. That's my deal with our society. I can contribute more. But oh no, we won't do that. But we will use that as an argument against making access to GP fees equitable. And the reason we need to do that for every member of our society is we need all of them. Encourage people to go to the GP. Because illnesses do not look at your bank account. They happen. Admittedly, illnesses happen more with poor housing, but you know, obviously the Alliance Party are the party of the landlord and exploitation. That's fine by me. That's their choice, but it's certainly not my choice. We've failed to address housing conditions. We've failed to address income inequality, but we can give. Sorry, we failed to address income inequality, and we've failed to address some of the issues that are affecting children in schools. And what we get is an attack on people coming to the island, which from the population policy in inverted commas that we have got, will be temporary group people coming to the island because we desperately need them for our industries, but we don't want them to access healthcare while we're here because that's just taking it away from those good Jersey people and all of us that are paying our taxes. Well, they're paying tax too. So this amalgamation of poor ideas and vitriol does not address the issue in this amendment. This amendment is about, you have a choice. Do we want to make access to GP care accessible for everybody on this island so that we encourage people to go to the GP, we encourage them to get primary health care, we encourage them to deal with things early on so there is less expense later on? Or do we stay where we are, another review, another look at data? Let's put it off for a few years. Let's do it a bit later on when we know whatever. I don't even know what this data is that we're going to produce, to be quite frank. We've got so much data and no data. It didn't help with the population policy, did it? Because we've got absolutely nothing there. Or perhaps a system might be, let's give everyone a £100 gift card again. They can spend that on the doctors. You know, they can spend their £100 gift card on the doctors because there's money for that. So this is targeted. It's targeted at the people of Jersey and it cares about their health. It is simple. So I would urge members to accept this and look at this amendment very sensibly and look at the positive outcome for your constituents above anything else. So I urge members, I double urge members to support this amendment. Thank you, sir.
So I overheard a phone going off towards this side of the assembly. I'm not sure if it's been left in a bag by somebody else, but if the bag could be taken out and completely destroyed, that would be an enormous assistance to the functioning of the assembly. Thank you. Does anyone else wish to? Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. The last time I checked, we still lived in, I think, a broadly Christian society, and that doesn't mean that everybody is a believer in the traditional sense of the word, but what it means is that the values of charity that have shaped certainly our traditional ways of thinking over centuries, I think are still valid, and they're not unique to the Christian tradition. They are ones which are shared commonly with all the great religions, and indeed even those with no faith. And listening to the way that our Social Security Minister is speaking. I'm struck that at this time of year about what I perceive as the lack of compassion and charity in her, not just her words, but also in her delivery. And so it is with some trepidation that I would try and quote the gospel, because I've been thrown out to by invoking the deity from this assembly in the past. But given that I'm at a safe distance and that I'm not in the assembly today, I don't think I can be ejected, and nor would I be saying anything that would merit me.
Well, we can switch you off.
I'm sure that would be.
Just be warned as you proceed.
But as I say, sir, as indeed on that occasion there was no reason for throwing me out, there won't be today either. Although my screen just did flash, and I got worried there for a moment. I'm reminded of the parable of the Good Samaritan, and it goes something like this. There was a certain man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell amongst robbers, who both stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. By chance a priest was going down that way, and when he saw him, he passed the other side. In the same way, a Levite also saw him. He came to the place and saw him and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he travelled, came to where he was. He saw him and he was moved with compassion, and he came to him, bound him up, his wounds, pouring oil and wine, and putting him on his own animal, he took him to an inn. And then the next day, he basically took him to a doctor and paid for the care himself. But of course, you've got the gospel according to Saint Judy Martin, sir, which would probably go something like this. There was a certain man who was coming down from the parade to Minden Place, and he injured himself and he needed some real help. He was lying on the floor, and several people were walking past, and then the Social Security Minister came over to him and said, "Oh, you look in a bad state. Can I see your Social Security card, please?" "Oh, sorry, you haven't been here for 5 years. I would like to help you, but I can't. But don't worry, mate, there's a boat in the morning." I'm not sure which particular ethos members would like to espouse when it comes to our healthcare system. But I think I know which one fits the bill when it comes to our own Social Security Minister. And it's a real shame, because we know that COVID has taught us many lessons. And indeed, because of COVID, it was necessary to extend the availability of affordable GP cares and GP visits for those who needed to because of COVID. But let's not kid ourselves that the motivation of this government was that it wanted to look after people. It was purely to protect, or primarily to protect, the economy, because you couldn't have all of that foreign labour, which we rely on so heavily and have relied on top of our own local workforce, if you want to call it that, because the economy would have been severely affected. But now, as we go into more ordinary times, perhaps, we couldn't possibly want to pay for people who are not from Jersey, who are nonetheless paying tax, paying social security contributions and paying GST, to allow them not free doctors' visits, but affordable doctors' visits. I find those comments particularly distasteful when the minister talks about people just coming off the boat. They are, in my opinion, borderline racist, and I would disassociate myself from those comments. But let's not get fixated on just that one, perhaps narrow band of people living in the island who might need access to healthcare. I would ask the question, how many people do we know, honestly ask ourselves this question, do we know of anybody amongst our friends, our constituents, our relatives, who have perhaps died prematurely because they haven't accessed primary healthcare, an early intervention at the right time? I can say that I probably know several, and the reasons for them not doing that might also be various, but in many cases it is because, and I've said these things before when we've discussed it, it's because of cost. In some cases it's because there's a reluctance to go to the doctor amongst a certain generation. You tend to be stoical, you put things off only if they're really bad and you don't want to trouble the doctor. And when we have a disincentive, which is a very high cost relatively amongst civilized countries, so on top of the psychological disincentives to need to go and see a doctor or to want to see a doctor, you have the additional barrier of saying, well, it's going to cost you quite a lot. And then you immediately get this mindset that actually it's not a normal thing to do. You only do go and see a doctor if it's absolutely necessary, or if you've got private healthcare, which I know perhaps 40% of the island do. So we already have this two-tier system where some people will routinely have a good relationship with their GP. And it's really important, I suspect, to go and see your GP, not just when you're feeling bad, but routinely to have those checks so you can get anything flagged up. I've lost members of my family who I know haven't had conditions picked up. And it's strange because even when they have been seeing doctors regularly, often paying, I can speak personally from my mother. She would regularly have consult doctor's visits coming to see her, being charged £100 a time, but often just for routine prescriptions that, she'd get a chest infection, they'd come up, prescribe antibiotics, £100 please. But for some reason they don't pick up a long-standing underlying cancer that has clearly been attacking the body for, I'm sure, months or years. They don't pick up the fact that you've got a withered kidney that's presumably been there for months, years, or perhaps even from childhood. How is it that you can live in Jersey and have these serious underlying health issues, even when you do go and see a doctor, not being picked up? I heard about somebody just this morning who dropped dead at the age of, must be 50. He was a salt of the earth guy who used to work with me in one of the tourism industries in Jersey, and very healthy, didn't smoke, didn't drink, and he's dropped dead. What's the reason for that? Would it have been a different story if he had been able to go and see a doctor, or he had the habit of seeing the doctor? I note that the boss that he works for is well into his 90s and seems to be doing well, and good luck to him. But we do have a divided society, and we do have many people in this island who can't see a doctor. And rather than listening to the, I think, divisive rhetoric of the Social Security Minister who says, well, how on earth are we going to pay for this? It shouldn't be beyond the wit of man. First of all, there is money in the HIF fund that should be used for this purpose. And there are ways, which we all know about, to make our Social Security contribution system much fairer. And why should the rich be excluded from being able to see a doctor affordably? Because they're the ones who have paid into the system anyway through tax and through their contributions. So, I would like to live in a kind of island and community and society where it doesn't matter who you are, that if you need to see your GP, you can do so affordably, whether you're top, middle or bottom in our island, because I think health is the great leveller. And of course, death and taxes are inescapable, but whilst you can escape tax, you can't cheat death, I'm afraid. And we all want people to live long, happy and fulfilled lives. And I think this is a hallmark of a civilized society, sir. So I leave the comments there. So I hope I haven't caused anyone undue offence, but I think sometimes it's important to speak plainly and passionately about something which I think we should all be singing from the same hymn sheet on, sir.
Very much. Deputy Young.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't planning to speak early, but I do recognise, and I said yesterday, I think this is a really, really important debate. What I would like to do is to take some of the divisive politics out of the debate, which I think that gets in the way of trying to rationally look at what the island faces in terms of our community and healthcare. And I think in me, this is really a head and a heart choice. And of course, the debate, I have absolutely no doubt that both Deputy Southern and Deputy Martin are absolutely sincere in what they say. But I think we need to think rationally here, but recognise the scale of what we face. Members will know this is not my subject area in terms of my area that I've chosen to specialise or become involved in, but in the 1980s, members may not know that I was Director of Finance and Clinical Information for a health service, and I worked with the Health Committee of the day when the late Jack Roche headed that group of wonderful people with the healthcare reforms. And I was privileged to be part of a tremendous team of both clinicians and non-clinicians. And what I find really astonishing to me is that the problems we were experiencing then are still here, prevalent in the 2020s. And the reason as that is that we know that the demand for healthcare is pretty well exponential. Science and practice of medicine has transformed at a pace that nobody thought possible. Treatments which people could only dream about are now available. But of course, all this has a massive, massive cost. And of course, what do we do as a society to do that? Jersey's structure of its health service, I think it's only since the 60s, I think, that the government effectively took over the running of our hospital. I think that's probably true, and brought what we now know as our secondary healthcare system into government. And of course, the primary care service, which is the key, and it's obviously the subject of this debate, has evolved before that time based on the model of private sector healthcare. And of course, the financial systems that were put in place under the then Social Security Committee, who were well ahead of their days in the various funds they set up, and they set up a whole series of ring-fenced funds for pensions, funds for healthcare and the like. And of course, we wouldn't be having a debate here where we were talking about, as Deputy Southern told us, £2 billion in one of those funds if we hadn't had such an arrangement in place. But of course, what has happened is that those funding arrangements worked well in the post-war days, probably the 60s and 70s, but increasingly with the changes in our community and the changes in the nature of the island, I think they've become completely overdue for change. Because there's in no question, the big debate of healthcare is who pays. Now, while we haven't got a solution to that, what happens? Deputy Southern is right. There are a very large number of people, I don't know what the numbers are, that are inhibited from going and seeking GP care. I think one can take a view on that. Children, certainly, probably, elder people and others. I don't know what that area is, but there's no doubt about it that there is a very large numbers. And of course, what does our healthcare experts tell us? Our healthcare tell us that in Jersey, and I don't think it's changed, is that there is a huge record of late diagnosis. Late diagnosis, if conditions were identified earlier, then people would be less clinically unwell, and conditions would be treated. And sadly, at some point, of course, those situations tragically end up with people have left it too late. And I think that's something that we all have to recognise, that we do need this. We do need to review the system. Now, of course, so the debate for me, and so Dennis, Deputy Southern has parcelled up this principle in this what appears to be at first sight just a set of mechanical propositions on numbers. Let's not take a chunk of money out of one of those accumulated funds, £7 million, he says, and that's the solution. But the second part is the introduction of a universal primary health care service, which I would love to be able to sign up to. It's the decision that the Labour government of the 1940s, that visionary government, signed up to in Britain in 1946 and set up the thing that everybody is so proud of in the UK, the National Health Service. And it's almost now very deified, and absolutely rightly. And I think, of course, the symptoms that occurred in the UK, my own, from speaking to my grandparents, relatives of theirs died in the days before those NHS service because of illness, where they couldn't afford the doctors. So this goes to the heart of things. So what's the solution then for us? I think there's no question that we have to find a system of funding our primary healthcare system that reduces the pressure on our secondary healthcare system, can make our society more healthy, and it will save money in secondary care. And we need to build a system around general practitioners. And it really pains me when I go to my own GP, and the GP tells me how very unhappy they are. There's something has gone wrong here in developing finding that journey through. And I so wish that we could solve those issues. Now, I got every confidence in the papers that I've seen, because they list that from Deputy Martin, and it's about what we are seeking to do with the primary healthcare model. And those subjects are right, but they are enormous challenges. And so I think we have to stick with that rational process and find a way where we can devise a healthcare funding system which works for our society in the modern day. Will it be universal, or will it be based on means to pay or means tested? Well, I think if we had a system of health tax or health charge that was ring fenced, then I think, yes, we could possibly do that, and then rely on the taxation system and the charging system to do so. And so I don't think we're not alone. And of course, listening to Deputy Southern, I tracked around on the website. He was saying, well, the problem is that we've not adjusted our support for GP consultations beyond the £20. I know we have. It's wonderful that we have this start of this. I can't remember what the short-term access scheme is called, but it's really good that in the most severe case we have that in place. But it is equally true that £20 for everybody else is when the GPs face such very high costs. My own GP says to me, we work for 2 days out of every week paying for our interest costs and our rents. That's part of a huge cost, and we all know what property costs have got in the island. So I've always think one of our solutions might well be is to provide some infrastructure and buildings and lease them to GPs rent free, so to reduce that, which will at least reduce some of those imposed costs on our GPs, to enable those charges to come down. That'd be one possibility. The other one, ultimately, I believe we might employ some GPs ourselves in order to be able to create a more competitive situation. Now, these are all opportunities. It is a big task to find that solution. And the choice, obviously, we get to here is, do we convince ourselves that there's a short-term proposition which will help us get there quicker and better, or do we reluctantly say we have to find a way of getting right? I would like to achieve both. I want the short-term help to prevent the most disadvantaged groups getting that care. I want that funding arrangement in place, and I want it extended as far as possible. But do I think we can have a universal healthcare service without in place the full model with the tax and charges system to make it work properly for the long term. I'm not convinced, sir. I wait till it's here, other speeches, but I'm not convinced of that, sir. Sadly, I wish I could. My heart said support it. My head says not, sir. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy Davidson Peter.
Thank you very much, sir. I think it is well known that when I returned to Jersey, my interest in politics was piqued by the hospital, whatever iteration it was before, my passion to building a hospital is well known. However, a hospital without fully motivated workforce of consultants, nurses, etc., and extending to the GPs is like having hardware without software. It's useless. They have to work together. And so during the course of that journey, I've developed relationships with many GPs. And let me tell you something, I just checked my e-box in case I missed anything. I haven't had one GP contacting me and asking me to support this, because they know that the issues are far more fundamental than that. Subsidies are not the solutions. What they're looking for is a total review of the whole funding model and the relationship with HCS. Their issues are not the transaction of the subsidies. They need help with recruitment, training, investment in their practices, investment in the equipment in their practices to deliver the local services, the services in the community they want. That's what they crave. And my urgency now, my effort now, is reluctantly not to support this, but is actually to continue pushing behind the scenes to make the relationship better between HCS and the GPs and accelerate the way that model works, so the GPs are better prepared to deliver the care in the community to the island that we deserve, what we want. That's where my focus is going. And unfortunately, this proposition, or the amendment to the proposition, doesn't solve that problem. Final comments are, I'm drawn to Deputy Sutherland's comments on technology. I don't know what's been going on in the world, or his view of what's been going on in the world, but technology is taking over. And yes, okay, if he chooses to take some money from one fund to another, don't take it from technology. This island really needs to catch up and invest everything it can in technology in order to take on the world at large as we progress going forwards. So I cannot support raiding the technology fund for that. In fact, we should be putting more into it, I admit, in a target and focused way. So thank you, sir. I can't support, even though I reach out to all the GPs I work with and say I will continue to do what I can to support them, but this is not the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy St. Juan.
Thank you, sir. And I would like to speak about the major review the government has committed itself to do, working with GPs and all partners in care. And the Social Security Minister has mentioned this, and it is a firm commitment of the government. And I would refer members to page 177 of the government plan. It's a major review as to how we fund all the future costs of all the health services that we will need in the future. And whilst that review is carried out, the hospital will still be open, the Minister for Social Security will still be supporting the cost of GP visits through the Health Insurance Fund. But the commitment is to provide the next government with the results of the review, and by early 23, the next Assembly will be able to examine the plan for those services and the costs and how they will be paid for. Not 2027, as has been suggested, but early 23, the next Assembly could consider this, with a possibility of a new funding coming in that year or in 2024. So the sort of things we've got to consider. We have an aging population. That demographic are the primary users of primary care services. Medical treatments advance, there's more and more options available for care. And we know that demand for healthcare will increase in the future. And we've seen especially an increasing demand for mental health care, which has to be front and center of this review also. And we've come through a pandemic, and we know the impacts of COVID. I say we've come through, we are still in a pandemic. We know the impacts of COVID will be felt for years to come, and we must ensure that our healthcare services are fit for pandemic conditions and addressing the needs of our population during such. We've learned so much as a result of COVID, but we've got to embed that and take it forward. And we need a stronger public health function in Jersey. We've lacked that in the past. We are building on it, but we need to ensure that we address preventative care to keep people well, as previous speakers have spoken of, and address the conditions that can build up in somebody before they become ill. So this review can't be done this side of the election. It needs to be done thoroughly. The work is starting. We've committed to begin work on all that in 2022 with our partners, but it's going to be a thorough review to the next government so that the next government can take the actions needed to maintain our health systems for the future. And this is about sustainable funding. It's going to cost tens of millions of pounds that will be needed. And it will include the consideration of replenishing the health insurance fund. So it's by no means the case that the health insurance fund is going to be exhausted. And that would have been a given to be included in any review, but the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel, in an amendment to this plan, has asked that that be expressly stated, and government has agreed. As an agreed amendment, the review will include specifically the consideration of replenishing the health insurance fund so that it can become the means of providing sustainable funding. So the Deputy's amendment is simply just carry on and extend what we've got. It drives a coach and horses through the concept of collecting evidence in a changed situation and putting forward a reasoned argument for better care. He provides no justification for the expansion of what has been a well-targeted health access scheme to an expensive universal scheme, which is going to require huge funding with no funding route in place. I believe, sir, the GPs would be unlikely to support the Deputy's proposals. They want us to progress with a comprehensive review of funding. They want us to identify and create a more sustainable funding stream for their services in order that they can plan their services for the future. At present, GPs have to rely on income, which relies on uncertain numbers of people turning up at their surgeries from day to day, because they only get paid when people turn up. That makes their services vulnerable in times of pandemic or epidemic. It just makes planning so much more difficult. And it doesn't meet their objective, government objective, to provide preventative services. It relies on people turning up. And as Deputy Ward so graphically illustrated to us, and I'm much the same, we're only likely to turn up when we feel ill, when we're badgered into doing something, when eventually we get round to thinking, this ache, this pain isn't going away, I better do something about it. And I was moved by Deputy Tadier's speech when he spoke of the people he knows who needed access to essentially well-being checks, preventative care, to pick up on conditions before they start impacting on people's health. And that is the position we want to move to. But if we have a system that only pays for people when they choose to turn up, that's so much more difficult to achieve. And Deputy Southern's proposal is to maintain that poor system that relies on people turning up when they feel unwell and need a doctor. We can do better than that. The better option is to take the broader, longer term view and keep our population in good health. That is certainly what GPs want also. So the review we are planning can ensure that we will put before the Assembly a scheme that meets that objective and can begin from 2024 feasibly. And we are working with GPs to that end. Sir, just 6 days ago, a news release came out, issued jointly by the government and the primary care body. That was the first time that had happened. And I was very pleased it happened. But because it was good news, it really received very little publicity in the local media. But what it was about is to confirm that Jersey GPs have been working with Health and Community Services throughout this year and were continuing to do so to start changing the ways in which care for islanders will be delivered. And the news release was about an investment of £1 million in primary care services of GPs to allow the GPs to give significant time and resource that is required for joining us and everyone in healthcare in the island in planning sustainable funding mechanisms. And the comment made by the GP of the primary care body in the press release is as follows, and I quote, "We are pleased that the future work we will do and the significant contribution which GPs make has been acknowledged in this way, as well as the part they are playing and will continue to play in the Jersey Care model, which is based around community care being accessible to all islanders. Primary care central to the Jersey Care model, and GPs want to continue developing even stronger primary care." And I close the quote. So I am really pleased, and I thank the primary care body for joining with us. As they have done throughout the year, we maintain a good conversation between the department and GPs, but there is this additional commitment we have been able to make to each other to work together on this to create that sustainable funding scheme which can come before this Assembly as soon as possible. The members can see work has started, work will be developed, particularly during next year, and will come forward. So this can be done. It is difficult, it's going to involve expenditure, but we need to plan that carefully and we need to be able to sustain it. Deputy Southern's uncosted, unfunded scheme does not create a sustainable funding, and it just doesn't work for the reasons I've stated. And therefore, sir, I urge, and as the Social Security Minister has strongly urged also, I really urge members that there is a better way of doing this, and therefore to reject the Deputy's proposals. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy Pamplin.
Thank you, sir. So I speak to this debate understanding fully the angst and thrust of Deputy Southern's proposition. The key component of the Jersey Care model was the sustainable funding mechanism. But as we, as the panel, have presented, the Health and Social Security panel, I should mention, presented all the way through the process, this was missing from day one, but with the promise that it would be worked on and presented and in place by 2025 in 3 years' time. Deputy Southern is right to highlight the commitments made in the propositions and speeches a year ago to win support and votes for the proposition for the care model and the first tranche funding amendment to the health and insurance fund that we did also after the the government plan debate last year, and the subsequent yearly funding of the development in the form of the tranche payments paid from the HIF. So these have also been the foundations of our concerns and why we brought our amendments to this government plans, which the Health Minister just mentioned, and we were pleased as a panel they were accepted. Work has been done this year on tranche 1 of the the preparation for the Jersey Care Model. We have scrutinised the work and progress to the best of our ability. Progress has been made. As we said then and now, the future care delivery must be evolved to be more clinical, economical, sustainable, but unique, and must not use its uniqueness of Jersey's delivery of its care system. Should not be a replication or a fudge of any other jurisdiction's healthcare system like a UK NHS, for example. It has to be right for Jersey's needs. We will speak more about this in the debate following the government plan debate on the Social Security Minister's amendment to the HIF law for the Tranche 2 funding proposal. But back to this amendment, sir, the HIF fund has sort of taken on a mythical life of its own sometimes in the truth of what it has and is used for, and I hope the following information will assist members in this debate. The fund is currently around estimated at 105 million. It's financed by Social Security contributions, roughly 2% of earnings, up to the standard earnings limit. Because of the pandemic, things have changed, and in terms of a drop in contributions, highlighted recently by a written question by Deputy Morel to the Social Security Minister, we can see those slight changes. And also, as we voted for last year, some funding to support COVID-19 pandemic preparations as well. But the reality is the use of the HIF fund has been used for other uses over the last few years. Briefly, some examples. 2015, the State of Jersey introduced the Jersey Quality Improvement Framework, under which payments were made to GP practices under a standard contract, the aims of encouraging high quality outcomes for their patients. All GP surgeries mostly participated in the framework, which distributed payments according to whichever practices meet some all around 35 clinical and organisational measures. The amounts paid were about 1.6 million each in the years 2015, 16 and 17. Other payments have happened at similar amounts, roughly 2 million a year and increasing each year. So since 2017, various other payments have been made by the Health Insurance Fund under contracts to GP practices and pharmacies for activities such as undertaking vaccinations against the flu. This amounted to, for an example, around 350,000 in 2017. Primary care activity related to cervical smears was expected to reduce the number of GP visits, leading to a medical payment by the Health Insurance Fund at around roughly 3,000 a year and is ongoing. There are previous transfers from the Health Insurance Fund for primary care funding, around 2 million in 2013, 6 million in each of 2014 and 15. The HIF also covers payments for gluten-free vouchers as well, sir. However, interestingly, if you look at the actuarial review, the last one done, it does highlight that primary care activities is the lowest part of the expenditure of the Health Insurance Fund. Next highest is medical benefits, but many millions of pounds more for prescriptions. Again, a reminder, the Health Insurance Fund bears the full cost of any drugs prescribed by GP, provided those drugs are included on a list drawn up by the Health Minister. However, as highlighted recently by our panel, many islanders with long-term health needs, like asthma, for one example, are having to pay now a repeat prescription fee at around roughly £7 each time, every 3 months, so to speak. So this would suggest, which needs to be part of the actuarial review next year, that needs to be done as looking as what is happening right now in real terms and the financial pressures of those covering the needs and costs of Ireland's health needs. The Deputy is also right highlighting the concerns of the IT budget side of things for the Jersey Care Model. Again, one of our major concerns as a panel and highlighted in one of our accepted amendments to this government plan. And again, we will be highlighting in future speeches. So I think in conclusion that the Health Insurance Fund co-medical payment is long overdue a raise. But equally, sir, as I have just mentioned, there are other concerns about the ongoing outgoing costs of drugs and prescriptions and how that is being used. This urgently needs to be part of the actuarial review next year and the ongoing measures to maintain the Health Insurance Fund for the next few years, as the other issues as Deputy Southern raises. However, with the payments of the Jersey Care Model tranche funding, even though the risk of this funding process is in the hands of the government's creation, stopping the good work that has been made to improve our healthcare systems to make the patient journey and pathway, in my opinion, would be wrong. Equally, sir, we are disappointed that the independent board to review Tranche 1 and the ongoing work of the care model was not put in place. Again, a subject matter we will be referring to later on. But I would have preferred that to be in place. I think that assurance is needed when we're talking about this health insurance fund. This is something I've raised publicly in hearings and quarterly hearings in this assembly and privately to both ministers, and this puts a risk on the care model Tranche 2 funding and the delivery of the care model going forward, and that concerns me. So should this have been the way it's supported, funded? Maybe not. But we can't risk going back to square one, wasting millions of pounds and end up not having a care model that goes all the way back to the original P82 back in 2008. The Deputy's amendment, I fully understand, because the way this has been over the last few years is inevitable, sir. The reality that is that our unique island setup which works, and we want to keep the core of that and not go down the road of a fully funded NHS that is the detriment to care delivery. But equally, sir, we do not go to the other extreme and follow an American insurance-paid premium, sir. We need to get this right as soon as possible. Everyone in care, primary and secondary, needs to continue getting around the table to work this out. There are challenges to all funding, primary and secondary. It's not perfect in this modern world against the backdrop of the island's high cost of living and the strain finding a constant stream of health workers and doctors to care assistants. And as the Deputy also rightly mentions, the continued rising costs of drugs and prescriptions should concern us all each year. So, in conclusion for my speech, sir, if he's taking his proposition parts, I may be able to support some of it, but stress again that next year's actuarial review and the ongoing work on the sustainable funding, which must be presented by 2025, cannot be brought forward on the last moment and needs to be injected with the same level of urgency seen in the setup and running of the current vaccination rollout. This must not fail. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak. Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me? Yeah, I hope, yes. Thank you, sir. And I would like to echo words from previous speaker, from Deputy Parkling, that we need to get it right as soon as possible. And I wrote points through this debate, and apology if my speech will not be completely round, as when I listen to the debate and reflect upon my own behavior, it is the first and best reference I have to examine the general public reaction to the cost of visiting a GP. And as Deputy Ward said, I also cannot put myself in the category of people who struggle to pay, as I have the ability to pay for my doctor. Even so, I still hesitate. I try to ensure I get a few things done at the same time so I don't have to come back again anytime soon. My GP charge $49.50 for visit now, not 45, as Deputy Southern mentioned. It's even 10% more, and I do have good GP. I really pleased with my GP service. I'm sure that anyone who less fortunate than me might postpone this important visit for even longer and collect even more pains and symptoms to deal with at some stage in the future. It is well known many conditions, including diabetes, high blood pressure, stomach pain, kidney pain. The list of reasons to visit your GP is long, and I don't want to waste Assembly's time by listing all symptoms that are symptoms of chronic and acute condition which are best discovered and treated earlier. I know people, dozens of people, who self-medicate with over-the-counter antibiotics brought in from other countries, chemists and bought over-the-counter, or medications brought by family and friends from other countries. And despite the prescription being free in Jersey, as it's cheaper and they can use it when they need it. Self-diagnosis and self-medication just compounds this problem. As Deputy Young mentioned, we have record about late diagnosis, and I'm echoing also Deputy Young, because for me it's also between heart and head. At the same time, I understand that postponing the visit and living with symptoms for longer leads to physical damage to our population, which leads to lost days, weeks, and years of work, and ultimately cost lives. This is essentially that the physical maintenance of our workforce, our children, our wider population. And I agree with the Health Minister. I think that we are on the same page also with the Health Minister, according to his speech, where we need to make sure that our population is healthy and we need to ensure that our preventive care is there. So it's general terms about the GP, it's general vision about the GP visits. If I'm going according to parts of the proposition, I'm not entirely sure about the part A, as it's different debate for me about technology fund. And I understand why Deputy Southern brought it in. As anyone who brought an amendment to the government one, we try to find where we can find the money. And technology fund was one of those that was probably easier to rate. So I'm not sure about the part A. Part B, this is where I'm reflecting and thinking. Deputy Southern timeline that he gave us, it was a year to find the funding solution. And as we know that everyone, including backbench, including ministers, new council of ministers that will bring forward that funding solution that would make it work, if it will be through the government review or if it will be through other things. I'm really pleased to hear that we work closely with GP. And other options were mentioned, if it's health tax or mean tested with different income level, probably higher income level than we have only income support. Another point, which is not necessarily linked to this proposition, but I will address here because, as it was mentioned by the Minister of Social Security in her speech, we spent 30 million on rent support. Interesting enough, the large percentage of the people who are also 5 years residents on the island. These people can work anywhere, but only can rent unqualified accommodation, which is much more expensive and a huge cost for the state of Jersey. If we really want to make a saving, maybe we allow people who can work anywhere to live anywhere and scrap unqualified accommodation and get some saving from this 30 million towards the GP visits. And it's another option. This is coming back to my point that we have a year to examine it. So for me, I think, as I'm speaking, it's more about the principle of expanding access to GPs primary care at universal affordable prices, ensuring every family and every family member can afford to see GP before it's too late. And personally, I also looked back at my votes as Deputy Southern brought several propositions, several attempts, and some Assembly accepted, some I supported Social Security Minister because we needed time for the consultation and for the solution. We have several debates last year, and I think that today, I feel like on Part B, I cannot support the government, and it's long time, and we do have a year, and we have time to review on reviews and study, and it's good that we are working with GP and we can bring something maybe different. So reducing cost of the primary care, reduce the pressure of the secondary care. We have to act quicker and not by 2025. We have to put it right, as Deputy Pamplin said. We have to make sure that it's funded. And for me, I think the Part B will be more vote in principle with my heart. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak.
I've indicated.
Deputy Higgins.
Thank you. I'm going to be very brief. The last speaker said we've got a year. We don't have a year. There is an election in June. We'll be in Purdah before that. And the government say, oh, we're going to do this work, and then the next government will look at it. The truth of the matter is, look at how many things have been promised that will be done before the end of this year that haven't been done. What is the likelihood of what the government is proposing being done before the election? So states members in this assembly can speak on it. I think highly unlikely. And what I will also say is, it also comes down to confidence. Do I have confidence in the Social Security Minister? Do I have confidence in the Health Minister? And to be quite frank, I have confidence in neither. And With repeated government promises, I would rather go with the proposition in hand, and I shall support Deputy Southern. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy Senator Mesek.
Thank you, sir. And since this is the last state sitting before Christmas, I was pleased to hear from Deputy Tadia earlier his rendition of the parable of the Good Samaritan. And I confess I haven't quite got into the Christmas spirit yet this month. I've been too emotionally focused on the new Spider-Man film, but I'm promising once I've seen that, I will start getting into the Christmas spirit. And when Deputy Tadia spoke about the Good Samaritan, and it reminded me of all of the other lessons and parables I was taught as a child at this time of year in those closing weeks of school before Christmas. And of course, the very foundational principle, not just for those with religious views, but more broadly in society, the principle of love your neighbour as you would love yourself, and how in public life, at least, I know there are many people who would try to find a way of applying that basic principle to their politics, to their actions, and to how they treat other people. And I'm reminded of the great work that was done in the 19th and 20th centuries by some of the great Christian activists in Britain who tried to expand the welfare state precisely because they were inspired by that principle of love your neighbour, and who tried to crystallize it to specifics when it comes to different public services. And they crystallized it into from each according to their need, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. And the great Aneurin Bevan, who founded the health service in the UK, said that illness is neither an indulgence for which people have to pay, nor an offence for which they should be penalised, but a misfortune, the cost of which should be shared by the community. And I, for one, make no apologies whatsoever in believing in that wholeheartedly. And that is why I will vote with Deputy Southern, and frankly, any proposal that tries to take that fundamental principle that we share the cost of people's misfortune, of ill health, and that is our application of the principle of loving your neighbour as you would love yourself, because I think that that is the way our society should be going. And so for his philosophical consistency and for the values which he is clearly trying to put into practice, I think Deputy Southern deserves nothing but our commendation for the work that he has done in his time in this assembly to try to make healthcare more accessible for people in the island who need it. And the fundamental way that you do that in the context of our current system, it's to make it cheaper, because when there is a cost associated with it, you will put people off seeking healthcare treatment when they need it. And I listened to Deputy Ward before when he spoke of a recent occasion where he had to pay £60 to then be told that he needs to improve his lifestyle. Well, I've got an even worse example than that, sir, which is I recently paid £60 to be told there was nothing wrong. Well, I'll be thinking twice about doing that again in the future, won't I? You can't win. When you have to pay such an amount, you will be put off one way or another. Put off because you paid it to get bad news, or put off because you felt like it was a waste of time at the end of it. When a much better system would be one that said to people that we will be proactive in trying to ensure that you have good health. We'll be proactive in trying to ensure that we catch potential health problems early on so that they can be resolved quicker and ultimately cheaper as well. And I would say to Deputy Martin, and I won't stoop to the levels that she frequently stoops to in this assembly, but there is nothing wrong with the principle of universalism here. This idea that everything has to be means tested is not actually one that we agree with. It's not one that's in line with our philosophy of each giving according to their ability and receiving according to their need. It's about saying to people that your needs and the way we cater to your needs are separate to your financial worth as a person. separating those two issues. And actually, you can create better systems by taking means testing out of it and supporting universalism. We don't have means testing when it comes to providing places in our schools for children. Every child on the island, no matter how wealthy their family are, have a space for them in a state school, fully funded, if they want that option. And I don't see why that shouldn't be the case within our health system. And if people want to go private, fine, that's a matter for them. If they want to pay the premium, they can do so. But to have a fully funded health system, which is free at the point of need, would be one which would improve health outcomes on the island. And that's the direction of travel I think we need to go in. And I make no apologies for that, however uncomfortable it may make some feel, who it seems to me have no principles on which to fall back on when deciding how to pursue their political objectives. And so how do we get there? Well, there is a consensus, at least in our society, that we do not fund healthcare adequately, and that this needs to be looked at in one form or another. And this has been going on for a long time. We had P82 looking at a healthcare model several years ago now. We've had the Jersey Care model now being pursued, and the ongoing review there is into the long-term funding of our healthcare system. Clarity on which we were meant to be getting round about now, but with which we have none. And so there have been some scrutiny hearings recently where we've tried to dig down on this subject and try and get more clarity. And in the last health scrutiny panel brief public hearing with the health minister, he made two comments in response to questions that I asked him that I found were interesting. The first was that he said that in the Jersey Care model, all of the services which are currently provided for free will continue to be provided for free. And I'm repeating that simply so that it's on the record in more places than just one, so that it can be relied upon in future to make sure that we don't go down any road that sees greater costs at the point of need in our health system. But the second line of questioning I attempted to pursue with him was about the funding for healthcare. And I drew his attention to the debate which took place at the end of the last term of office on the introduction of what the government called a health charge, but which any thinking person would actually describe as a health tax, for that's what it was, which Deputy Young referred to in his speech. In fact, he didn't actually refer to that iteration of a health tax. He referred to a potential future iteration of a health tax. And that health tax was rejected by the previous Assembly, perhaps for multiple reasons, but certainly on my part was rejected because it was a regressive tax which proportionately asked the lowest earners to pay the most and the highest earners to pay the least, including that regressive and financially and morally unjustifiable cap. And that was rejected, I believe, on a tied vote by this Assembly, so it was close to going ahead. I asked the Minister in that hearing if he would be prepared to rule out a funding mechanism for the future which penalised low and middle earners whilst letting the highest earners maintain their tax privileges. And he wasn't quite prepared to do that and said that everything had to be on the table. And here we are towards the end of this term without any clarity. Oh, it's just going to be the next Assembly that's going to have to deal with this. And I wonder how many election candidates in June next year are going to be clear about that, who are going to have taken into account these comments that we've heard from time to time, that the next government will have to consider tax rises to pay for all of this. Who's actually going to stand before their voters next year and say, yes, in support of funding our health system, I will support increasing your taxes and exempting the super wealthy in Jersey from paying the rates that I'm asking you, the ordinary voter, to pay. I suspect there won't be many members that will have the courage to do that. But we may find ourselves in the position that we were in last term, where it comes before this assembly anyway. So what I think is a better way forward is to say that the situation we are in right now is not good enough. We have not had the clarity on the long-term funding of healthcare in the island that we should have had by this point. We know that people today are being put off seeking the healthcare that they need, not just those who are the poorest in our society, but those people who are just on the level above that, who don't quite qualify for the health access scheme, which Deputy Southern fought tooth and nail for, and is at least making a difference for those people who are eligible for it now, and who he now wants to make a difference for those who aren't eligible for it, so they can benefit from it too. So in supporting this amendment, we will be making a difference for those people. We will do something, at least in the meantime, which we can logically presume will improve health outcomes in the island, and ultimately make the delivery of the Jersey Care model, or a Jersey Care model, whatever gets done to it by the next assembly, cheaper, because we'll have improved those health outcomes in the meantime by getting people to go and sit in front of their GP and talk about their health concerns and receive the advice or medication or whatever it is they need to get better, or referrals on then to the next step. And I ask members who may still be on the fence on this to think, with all the reviews that are going on, you know, if you want to put your lot in with those reviews and say, I'm not going to support change now because of this review that's going on that may lead to change at some point in the future, well, ask yourself what change you do actually want it to lead to. Do you think that it would be a good situation for the island for these reviews to conclude that actually charging people an arm and a leg to go see a doctor is a good thing which ought to be maintained in our society? Or do you think that actually it's inevitable that some sort of proposal in the future is going to come forward that says it is right to reduce the cost of primary healthcare in the island? And if you think it's inevitable in the future, why wait for it? Why not just get on with it now? Accept Deputy Southern's proposition, as we accepted his previous proposition to introduce the health access scheme. You know, if we can't accept this proposal today because of the ongoing reviews, well, why did we accept his previous proposal on this? Well, we accepted it because it was the right thing to do, and it was inevitably the direction of travel we ought to be going in anyway. So let's save us some time and ultimately some money and adopt this amendment today to decrease the cost of going to see a GP for people in our island, for our neighbours, sir. And I would say our neighbour is not just the person who lives right next door to us, and it's not dependent on whether they have resident status in Jersey. Our collective health as a community means we look out for everybody. And so I would ask members to support this amendment on that basis, and I do so knowing that I'm acting entirely in line with the philosophy that drives me forward in everything I do in politics, and one which I'm proud to stand alongside people like Deputy Southern, who has also been entirely consistent on this. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator. Deputy Ash.
Thank you, sir. It's always a pleasure to follow the leader of this reform-led assembly, sir. Sorry, I couldn't resist that. We've seen some great speeches today from particularly members of the Reform Party. They always speak with a passion. They have great belief. They are, of course, correct, sir, that the health of islanders is paramount. It must be put before financial interests, in my opinion. If you remember my speech, I doubt you do, but when we spoke on the borrowing for the hospital, I said it is a government's pretty much #1 responsibility to look after the health of the population. You may also remember, sir, the speeches from the members of the Reform Party saying pretty much the same, sir, that we needed a new hospital so that we could look after everybody's health, so we could diagnose people early, and borrowing money was really no object. If you can remember that, sir, you have a considerably better memory than I do, sir, because it's playing tricks with you. They didn't speak for borrowing for a new hospital. They felt we shouldn't be borrowing for a new hospital. At that stage, sir, money was an object and we shouldn't be doing it. So selective politics, if you like, sir. Why? I don't know. So your guess is probably better than mine, but I'll give it a go. Borrowing £800 million is not a great vote winner. Stating that we can all see doctors for financially considerably less is, particularly if you don't then cost how much that will cost the island. Now, Deputy Young spoke very well, sir. I agree 100% with what he said. We do need to look at our whole GP offering. We did have a big look at it, of course, during COVID, and things changed substantially then, and it worked to an extent. But I agree with Deputy Young. If it's going to be a free-for-all at the point of entry, let's fully cost it. And if we're going to do that, so let's be honest. If we do, the GPs would have to be brought into the system, or they'd have to opt out and go 100% private. If we went down that route, we are effectively looking at an NHS solution. Now, I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, but it's something that could or maybe even should be looked at, but it should, when it is looked at, be properly costed. But so to use an expression I dislike, but I'm going to use it, we are where we are at the moment. So, and I can see that there is a problem with people being able to afford to go to the doctor. Some people can afford it, maybe others can't. So what do you do in a situation like that? Let me put this to the Assembly. If we had a problem where, say, we weren't going to have buses anymore, and we felt everybody on the island should have a car because everybody has a right to get around. We're not going to have buses. We're going to provide people who have a car. Would we, which is solution one, we'd find those who don't have a car and we would provide them with a car. That would seem a fairly reasonable solution. Or would we go with the Reform Party solution, which would be to buy every islander a car? That doesn't make sense, does it, sir? But that's what they're suggesting here. In order to help a section of our society that cannot or struggle to afford to go to the doctor, they feel we should provide across the board cover without even costing it, sir. It's alarming, isn't it? And then eventually, the same as all these solutions, people come back later and go, oh, well, it actually costs this. Where are we going to find it? We've got to adopt sensible solutions here. And as Deputy Young quite correctly said, we probably need a root and branch review of our whole GP system. But this isn't the way to do it, sir, and I would urge the Assembly to reject this. Thank you.
Deputies, any other member wish to speak on this amendment? No other member wishes to speak? Then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Southern to respond.
Thank you, sir. But before I respond to individual contributors, may I just ask whether parts 1 and 2 have to be together? If we pass part 2, do we
think the position is that you can take them.
To have part 1?
I think the position is you can take them all separately, but I'll just read that as I. I think they can be taken separately, yes.
Okay, good. Then in that case, I will propose all 3 parts separately. Thank you, sir. Right, and thanks to everyone who contributed. I think it was a debate worth having. I think it's a debate that's worth having now because of the possible timing of any changes. I think whether you accept my version of the way forward or the Minister for Health version, there will be an expense. We're going to have to spend more on our health service. That's almost inevitable, I believe. And I would ask people to bear that in mind when they vote. If I can respond to Deputy Martin, just to the phrase she uses, that in some way I'm lazy. Can I just point out that we can do things quickly, and we can do things that are worth doing. So that, for example, the scheme we have for subsidised visits to GPs came after I brought P125 of 2019, affordable access to primary care, and then followed up when nothing was happening with GP fees and income support, P81 of 2020. So two propositions there, which ended up by very early 21 being in place effectively. I believe that we do need to go further with that. And in terms of the numbers, I've taken the view that because means testing is bureaucratically difficult and always cuts some people out of the system, that we should go with a wider scheme. But if we could look at, for example, another group of people, those in relative low income, there's some 22,000 of them, as far as we know. At least there were back in 2014-15, which was the last time we did an income distribution survey. And I asked people to bear in mind that we don't have an up-to-date analysis of our economy and how much people, how much households are actually earning. It's been long overdue, and it's due to be produced, I think, by the end of 2022. Well, if the calculations that the health minister wants to do on 2022, if you're not careful, it's going to miss the vital element of how much do people actually earn? How many people are in relative low income? And the requirement to bear that in mind before we put forward any new scheme. It's not straightforward. Deputy Ward always amuses with his reaction to a £63 bill, 120 or 120 plus bill if he's got to go back. And as I say that, I think, but imagine what that is like for someone on a minimum wage. And that £120 plus is very, very significant. That's somebody's week's. And that shouldn't be principle that people have to think twice, 3 times and put off and delay going to the GP and investigating their health should not be happening. There shouldn't be a cost to being ill. Deputy Young made an interesting contribution where he talked about head and heart. I appeal to him to go with his heart and vote for this proposition, especially because he highlighted one particular aspect that we do badly in, which is late diagnosis. And the fact is that we need to do something about that. And that comes back to the fundamental problem that I'm trying to deal with in bringing forward health propositions, that it costs too much to go and see the GP. That's the reality. And unless we can do something about that, we're not going anywhere in terms of our fundamental standard of living on the island. And when I say that that's fundamental, I'm really referring to Deputy Tadier's remarks, where he talked about the lack of charity in some of the debate. But I don't think it's a lack of charity. It's a fundamental need for a decent wage, for affordable, decent housing, and the key element, affordable and accessible medical care. And when the Minister of Health was addressing the issue, he quoted a GP who was in debate with him, and they had agreed a statement. What I would say is they agreed a statement about accessible healthcare. That should be accessible and affordable healthcare, because that's the essential element that we need to get up to speed on. And finally, I think it's appropriate to talk of the number one responsibility of any government to ensure the health of their population, and to remind ourselves at this time of year that what we're trying to do is look after our neighbours. Thank you, sir.
Very much. I'll ask the referee to put a voting link into the chat. Open the voting and ask members to vote.
Are they going to be separate votes?
Yes, I beg your pardon. That's in separate sections, Deputy Southern, isn't it? So the vote is on paragraph. The vote is on paragraph 1 of the amendment.
Yeah, no, it's not working. Sorry, I'll...
So you'd like to vote for part 1, Deputy? Yeah, very well.
So I noticed that there's an extra box in the vote.
Yes, that's been. I think you just ignore that one and don't vote other. It's either poor. Sorry.
Not sure where that came from. Sorry.
Yes, it's that's a mystery to us. But either vote pour or contre or abstain on the link, and if people have difficulty, then vote in the chat. But that was your point of order, presumably, Deputy Taddy?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. We're only going to count Deputy Guida's vote once. So the amendment has been defeated. 9 votes for, 31 votes contre in the link, and a further 1 vote pour and 4 votes contre, not counting Deputy Guida's, that is in the chat. 10 votes.
Those voting for in the link, Deputy Young, Deputy Higgins, Senator Mezek, Deputy of St John, the Conotop of St Mary, Deputy Ward, Deputy Tadier, and Senator Valois.
We come on now to part 2. Of the amendment. The part that we are voting on now is the amendment, page 3, paragraph L. After the words "to the report," insert the words "except that on page 169 of Appendix 3, after the words "worth of expenditure," there shall be inserted the words "eligibility for the health access scheme shall be expanded to include all those ordinary residents of the island by 2023, with the proposed funding mechanism to be included in the 2023 government plan, in addition to any further changes to Appendix 3 identified as required by the Council of Ministers." That's the part that we're voting on. Very well. I'd ask Greffier to place a voting link into the chat, and I open the voting. As I say, the vote is on paragraph 2 of the amendment. Any luck with your vote, Deputy Sutton? Okay. Well, I'm assuming that that unparliamentary expression was a expression of success, that you voted. Yes. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. Paragraph 2 has been defeated, 27 votes contre, 13 votes pour in the link, a further 2 votes pour and 4 votes contre in the chat. Pour votes, please.
Those voting for, from the link, Deputies Ward and Pamplin, Deputy Higgins, the Connétable of St Mary, Senator Valois, Deputy Tadier, the Connétable of St Martin, Senator Moore, Senator Mezek, Deputy Southern, Deputy Gardner and Deputy Alves.
Very well, we come now to the third paragraph of the amendment. That is the one that says, after the words "to the report," insert the words "except that on page 169 of Appendix 3, after the words "sustainable model for health funding," there shall be inserted the words "but the role of the health insurance fund in meeting the requirement to subsidise the cost of GP consultations and the cost of prescriptions and other primary care services shall be maintained during the review, in addition to any further changes to Appendix 3 identified as required by the Council of Ministers." Therefore, I ask the greffier to place a link, open the voting and ask members to vote in the usual way.
Sir, may I ask a question?
Well, only if it relates to the voting.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
My computer has just decided to go blank, so may I register a poll?
You'd like to register a poll vote, Deputy Morell? Yes. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. Paragraph 3 has been adopted, 38 votes pour, 2 votes contre, no abstentions in the link, and 3 votes pour in the chat. After voting closed, Deputy Tadier, you've indicated a contra vote, but I can't count that, I'm afraid, because it's come off the event.
So I believe he's asking for the contra to be read out, not that he was voting.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
I think we're reaching the point of shorthand in the chat as not being terribly illuminating, although I appreciate the speed that people have to. I would have been surprised if there had been a contra vote indicated, in fact. Very well. Could you read out the contra votes, please?
Apologies, everything's being glitchy today. In voting contre in the chat, the Conotub of St Clement and the Conotub of Brouville. In the link, sorry, and in the chat, I think, was it just those two?
Just those two, right. Very well, we move on to the next amendment, which is the 21st Amendment lodged by the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel. Before I ask the greffier to read the amendment, there is an amendment lodged by the Chief Minister. Is that amendment accepted or not, Senator? In other words, can we read it as amended or take it separately? It's a
Sorry, sir, I'm
No.
struggling to recall. Was this just they wanted to take it separately?
The Chief Minister proposes that after the words "except that," insert the term one, and after the words to £0, delete the words and insert the words and two. So it's not particularly, it's quite sort of Delphic if you just read the amendment out, but it does seem, if one looks at the amendment itself, bear with me a moment. I don't know if you have that in front of you.
I do apologise. No, I think the panel had agreed not to accept the amendment.
Very well. Well, then I'll ask the greffier to read the proposition as not. The Chief Minister, yes, Chief Minister, just on this particular point.
Apologies, I'm echoing. So if it helps, the sole intention of the amendment was to split the original amendment in order to allow a separate vote on both parts. I'd understood the panel had accepted the amendment. Obviously, if you change their mind, that's fine, sir, but that was just to clarify the position.
Thank you very much. Are you able to confirm whether that's accepted?
That part we did accept to, yes, sir.
The greffier, I'd ask you to read the proposition as amended, please.
The states are asked to decide whether their opinion, C, to approve the transfers from one state's fund to another for 2022 of up to and including the amount set in Appendix 2, Summary Table 2 to the report, noting that the transfer from the Consolidated Fund to the Technology Fund is subject to the Assembly's approval of a proposition to create such a fund in 2022 in line with Article 9(2)(b) of the law, except that 1, the transfer to the Technology Fund shall be reduced to 0, and 2, the proposition to create such a fund shall explicitly seek the Assembly's approval of the purpose and terms of that fund.
Senator.
Thank you, sir, and apologies for the slight confusion there. I seem to be having a few technical glitches. But sir, £40 million is a considerable amount of money, as Assembly members are very aware, and I think that's only been borne out by the previous and important debates about the provision of healthcare, which certainly puts things into perspective. So the various sums that are under debate this week are both small and large, and they make up the whole expected revenue expenditure of £1.05 billion. That's almost £250 million more than the total net revenue expenditure that was set out in 2018. It's worth noting at this point that the total net revenue expenditure for next year is now projected to be £100 million more than it was predicted back in 2018. So the use of £20 million is very significant for the island, if used wisely, but there is concern that no further information has been provided by the government in either its amendment to the amendment or to the government plan itself regarding the specific terms of the fund or its purpose. The panel lacks the necessary background information and the context needed to substantiate the purposes of this hypothetical fund. The Assembly has not been advised of any terms in relation to governance, risk assessments, selection procedures, and any manpower or financial arrangements for the fund to be reassured on its delivery. Nor is there a sign of a clear working group to oversee the programme and guarantee accountability, or that there are sufficient staff in the government to manage this additional fund, even at its very early stages. Just last night, sir, I attended a discussion with small business owners. It became very apparent that there is concern about the growth of government, yet there is still only a very small number of people working in the area that supports businesses and the local economy. It would be apparent from that discussion that the administration of this fund and its purposes would place additional pressure upon the people in that department, or it would lead to further increase of the size of government to achieve it. The government plan does not outline, as the Assembly would expect under Article 6 of the Public Finances Law, the specificity of the fund's exact purpose, its terms, and the circumstances in which it may be wound up. The Assembly is still in the dark regarding the planned lodging or debate date for the legislation to establish the Technology Fund in 2022. And the proposed government plan indicates that the funding will be spent in 2022, but without the detail, it's impossible for the Assembly to ascertain the delivery timetable. Politically, there are questions, of course, to raise about the appropriateness of government trying to select which technology entrepreneurs will be most suitable to receive these funds if the Assembly were not to agree this amendment. There is an argument that government would be better placed to focus on providing appropriate legislation and regulation to enable a growing sector to flourish. Equally, members should ask themselves how else these funds could and should be used. We're all well aware that great debate, that many areas of island life that need additional investment, and the previous debate identified some of that, sir. So therefore, there is no guarantee that the next Council of Ministers would agree to create this new fund if the proposition is not forthcoming by April of next year. And it's therefore a risk that it becomes an inefficient use of public sector time and resource. In contrast, the Fiscal Stimulus Fund was established through a proposition P128 of last year that was lodged and agreed by the Assembly prior to debating the last government plan. That provided members the opportunity to scrutinise and understand the fund before adopting it. It is still unclear why this approach was not taken for this fund. The panel has consistently held the Minister to account for the outcomes of the Fiscal Stimulus Fund against its original aims back in 2021. The panel further notes the difficulties that the current and previous governments have had with the purpose, terms and winding up of funds. Given the deficiencies found in operating the Jersey Innovation Fund and the comments the panel lodged last month on the concerns it has around the proposed changes to the administration of the Anne Alice Rayner Fund, members will recall that that proposition has been referred back to the Minister for Treasury and Resources to answer questions in relation to the governance and structuring of the fund. So in conclusion, sir, the government of Jersey should be leading by example in ensuring best practice for establishing funds, particularly because it is the same government responsible for the adoption of the Public Finances Law of 2019. Thank you, sir.
Much is the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Senator, can I just assume before we start the debate, so members will be aware, are you proposing to permit a vote on each part independently?
That's correct, sir. Yes.
Indeed. Does any member wish to speak on this amendment? No member wishes to speak on the amendment?
Yes, sir.
Could we indicate in the chat, please, if members wish to? Thank you very much. Chief Minister.
Yes, sir. Sorry, I think there is also a delay between coming from in the chat to actually getting to you, but anyway. But thank you, sir. So let me firstly begin by thanking the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel for accepting our amendment, and I hope it assists members during the debate. And obviously, all the amendment has done is simply split the panel's amendment into two elements. And as we said in the comments, we don't accept the first part of the panel's amendment for reasons which I'll elaborate on, whereby it reduces the proposed monies to the fund to zero. But the second, to bring a proposition to the date to establish the fund, has always been our intention. I think it might be helpful if I try and attempt to do the technicalities briefly, sir. In the actual proposition, which is part C of the proposition around the government plan, it specifically states, noting that so we are being asked to approve as members the various transfers that are laid down. Article 9 of the Public Finances Law states the government plan must set out the proposed amount of any transfer of money from one state's fund to another during the next financial year, which is why the proposition makes reference to the 20 million in the context that we're dealing with. But it specifically states that that the transfer from the consolidated fund to the technology fund, I'm looking at page 2 of P90, sir, is subject to the Assembly's approval of a proposition to create such a fund in 2022. And actually, sir, the point being, the Senate has already referred to Article 6 of the Public Finances Law, and that law, that element, that article states, sir, the states may on the proposition establish a fund. When establishing a fund under this article, the states must specify the purpose of the fund, the fund's terms, and the circumstances in which the fund may be wound up. And there are also other various elements to that. So the point was, sir, this was trying to be transparent in the, if you like, giving a heads up, headlining the fact that we wanted to create a technology fund, but also very much making the point that very clearly this has to come back to the Assembly for all the areas that the Centre has rightly raised to be approved by this Assembly. And that is why, sir, we have absolutely no problem in accepting the second part of the amendment, because that is right and proper. And sir, I think what we are trying to say, sir, is that the thrust of the government plan as a whole is focuses on addressing not only the various legacy issues that we've been addressing, which is obviously the result of various underinvestment at various times over many years, but it also centres on the opportunities emerging from forward-looking economies. And so our vision for Jersey's future economy, which will be outlined in the island's first economic framework, is one of diverse and thriving sectors, which provide excellent jobs for islanders, and that's got to include our digital sector. I'm slightly scared, sir, that I have the Deputy of St Peter's face on the screen, so when I'm talking, but anyway, hopefully that's not what's the public domain, otherwise members of the public will get very, very confused.
We have your picture on our system, Chief Minister.
Then for that, I apologise, sir. As members will no doubt appreciate, it is only right to capitalise on fresh opportunities as we look to put Jersey's best foot forward. And work is underway to prepare our future digital connectivity requirements and the introduction of the next generation of digital networks, as we put a great deal of emphasis into this area. Now, sir, and I did actually state this in the scrutiny hearing on Friday, sir. We have, and it is very much as a result of the actions of our predecessors, we have a very strong foundation in terms of the digital area to build on. We do currently enjoy the fastest broadband speeds in the world.
And the point being, as we've said a number of times, we have a good deal of expertise in this area, and as a self-governing and English-speaking jurisdiction, it does actually make for an ideal sandbox for new digital technologies. And when I go away, when the Minister of External Relations goes away, when the Minister for Economic Development goes away, when other ministers travel, one of the things that certainly I use many times is this type of information. Yes, we are a small jurisdiction, but actually we are the fastest digital speeds globally. And actually, the latest information I had is that the number 2 jurisdiction, I'm not actually too sure it is about 30% slower than us. We are pretty well, we are basically 100% connected. I believe, sir, the UK is something like number 41 or 43 on that list. That is a really compelling story that we can tell to global partners. It makes them sit up and take note, and I've seen that across the table, sir. And the point about that, sir, is that that competitive advantage, that unique selling point, we've probably got about a 6-year head start on other jurisdictions. And that then, sir, is about providing, well, actually seriously investing in another leg to this economy. It's a very significant leg to this economy. It's demonstrating our commitment to that economy, and it's giving other people, so youngsters, an alternative career choice. Yes, we know skills, and all that sort of thing coming through, but there are other investment we need to do. And what was interesting, I've come across 2 articles that I can refer to literally in the last 24 hours, which I think highlight the issues that we're kind of facing. So, interesting enough, in the national media today, and I've got back to the original report, but I haven't had much chance to read it. It makes reference actually to our nearest neighbours, to France, and to the Cour des Comptes, who just issued a report. And certainly the quote from the national media article I was reading is saying that the auditors predicted that without tax cuts and massive investment in research and the green and digital economy, France, along with the European Union, faced technological retreat compared with the other major world powers of America and Asia. Now, fairly obviously, I'm not comparing ourselves with much larger countries, except for the fact that we have a 6-year advantage over everyone else in the world. And that is what the purposes of this fund, part of the purpose of this fund is to do that investment, to maintain and support that aspect of our economy. But don't forget, it's not just going to be for the tech sector. Now, this will have to come back to Assembly members. Let's be very, very clear here. But the principles and the thinking at this stage is about using that money to solve some of the challenges we have here, whether that's working towards carbon neutrality, digital skills, or transforming traditional industries. It's about investing in technology, which will put our island on the map and ultimately bring home further revenues. It's not just a fund for the tech sector, it's to support the new digital economy for everyone. And whether that's from health, or as we said, other aspects, the potential there is huge. And that's why, sir, it is incredibly important that, from my perspective, this Assembly, sir, does see that proposition to create the fund and has that input into setting that foundation. So as we said, it is about embracing that sector. It is funded, sir, initially through the dividend received from the recent sale of Jersey Telecom's Internet of Things. And that's why, sir, I do hope when that proposition eventually comes to this Assembly that members will approve that allocation into the fund. But sir, we know there are gaps in our innovation ecosystem. And from my perspective, and from the government's perspective, we, alongside other state-owned enterprises, arm's length organisations, should be sharing a duty and certainly should be sharing ambition to support and nurture this vital part of our economy, closing the gaps and creating new digital careers for islanders. As I said, I've talked about workforce, I've talked about carbon neutral, I've talked about, addressing social challenges such as digital skills. Workforce productivity is going to be critical in how we deal with, for example, the population challenges. Sustainable transport, digital health, fintech, regtech, you name it. There are a huge number of very exciting areas of development with the potential to dramatically improve our communication, connectivity, transport, and even health outcomes. And interesting enough, there are partnerships that we have with leading working groups in off Ireland who are doing a lot of investment and research into things like green travel and things like that. So, this could create additional jobs. It could act as a revenue stream for businesses, but the prospects are endless. And I very much would encourage members to embrace this idea. As I keep emphasising, proposals will be set out in a forthcoming proposition to the Assembly. It has to. That is the legal requirement. That is why, sir, we are asking members to reject part 1, which is to reduce the transfers to 0, but we absolutely endorse part 2. Nothing can happen until the proposition, a separate proposition, comes to this Assembly with the terms of reference, etc., laid down as required under Article 6 of the Public Finances Law. No money can be spent, nothing can be done. So there is an absolute safety and certainty for this Assembly that government will not spend £1 of that £20 million until that fund is set up, provided that is the structure we stick with. And so the point being, the excellent connectivity available in Jersey provides very much the ideal environment for technical innovation and entrepreneurship. It's about new product development and events where testing can be undertaken. And we should certainly be continuing to back our digital industries, supporting the development of sandbox environments. And that, as I've said, is a flag that we can fly, and we do fly, when nurturing relations within our global markets, within the other jurisdictions that we seek to engage with. And that is why, sir, for me, we should be confident in pledging our support to the digital sector, not only as a means to diversify our economy and provide jobs for islanders, but also to help put our island on the map when it comes to digital development. So, in short, sir, reducing the transfer to 0 would send a clear message to those watching that we don't support the technology and digital industries, which are actually very, very vital to our current and future prosperity, and also to what in the future we will be able to provide to islanders in terms of services and improving the future for our island and those who live on it. And that's why, sir, very much do urge members to reject the first part of the amendment, sir. Sorry, sir, I'm looking at a comment. But we do absolutely support the second part of the amendment of the Corporate Service Group panel. Thank you, sir.
But do you give way for a point of clarification from Deputy Gardner, Chief Minister?
Actually, sir.
I'm afraid it's gone. I didn't hear what your answer was, Chief Minister.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Deputy Gardner, what's your question? Point of clarification.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for Chief Minister for his speech. It was helpful. It's clarified first part of my question, so it will be quicker. I'm really reassured that the proposition will be brought back to the states and none of the funds would be spent before the proposition will be adopted by the states. Would the Chief Minister please clarify why the proposition cannot include 20 million? Why we have to vote for this 20 million now? Why he's objecting part, the first part of the proposition to try and reduce to 0 at this stage?
Well, I think his reason was the content of his speech. I mean, I'm not sure it's a point of clarification of something.
No, he didn't. Okay, I'll ask a different way. I didn't understand from the speech why zero cannot be brought together with the proposition, why 20 million cannot be brought together with the proposition.
So I think the reason we've done it this way round is we've tried to be open to members. That's why the transfers are identified in the government plan. Obviously the plan was started, the work on the plan, broadly speaking, gets wrapped up between sort of June and July, which from memory was roughly around the same time as the dividend was eventually identified from Jersey Telecoms. Please note that is that's my recollection, so it might not be entirely precise. And so I think the fundamental one there is we've tried to be absolutely transparent around the source, the proposal, and the source of the money, and that really is the best place to do that is in the government plan, as opposed to, in essence, it becomes a debate on the money as well as the purpose of the fund, if that makes sense. So we do quite strongly think that by reducing it to zero, the message that will then be sent out to, if you like, the digital sector will be, well, actually the Assembly has rejected the principles of the Technology Fund, and that is not a good message to then be able to take out both either internally or even externally. Whereas this around,
I think that's gone. I mean, it's gone quite broadly as a point of clarification, Chief Minister. I think you have clarified the position very well. Deputy St. Peter.
Sorry, sir. Before I did put in the chat, there is a delay in the chat about a point of clarification around the same area because.
Chief Minister, do you give way to a point of clarification from Deputy Ward?
Yes, sir. Sorry, I'm just cautious about becoming a secondary debate, as it were.
It's okay, Chief Minister, you don't have to worry. It's genuinely meant to be constructive. With the amendment, it says the transfer technology fund should be reduced to zero. So if that was voted against and there was no change to the technology fund, the second part is what would the proposition that would come to the Assembly? Because something you just said, something the Chief Minister just said, sir, was that it would come back to the Assembly regards the amount of the fund as well. I didn't quite get that. I heard part of the speech. I do apologise. I'm sat here listening intently. So what proposition would come back? Because I think that's quite important. If what would happen is that there'd be an agreement for a quantity of money, which would be, and then it will come back to say, well, let's see how we're going to use that. That's very different from saying, so whether we actually, what that quantity of money is and how we use that. So can we just have some clarity on what that proposition would be? And I think it's quite important to have a timescale, just so that we know what we're voting for, given splitting those two parts of the amendment. I hope you understand why I'm asking that question. I hope the Chief Minister understands why I'm asking that question. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Just need 30 seconds to make sure I've got the right page, so to answer the Deputy's question as well.
If it helps, so it's just the highlighted part in the amendment.
Okay. Yeah. So essentially, the government plan lays out the part of the government plan has to lay out transfers from the consolidated fund. The 20 million on the transfer from the in relation to the technology fund is subject to, right, effectively a separate approval of a proposition by the Assembly. So it cannot move, and otherwise it will sit on the consolidated fund balance, and that is it. It won't be used. The Article 6 of the law requires, when establishing a fund, so and that is what we're saying is that the proposition to establish the fund will come back to this Assembly because it has to. It says the states must specify the purpose of the fund, fund's terms, and the circumstances in which the fund may be wound up. So that's why, part 2 of the amendments states, which are very helpful, happy to support. Basically says a proposition to create such a fund shall explicitly seek the Assembly's approval of the purpose and terms of that fund. That's why, sir, we are very happy to support the second part. And the reason we're saying on the first part, the reduction to zero, is it fundamentally just sends a message that actually we don't support creating the fund, sir. And that's and for all the reasons we've been saying around our leading place globally in technology, in the technology sector, which I've been through in my speech, sir, we think that sends completely the wrong message. Is that sufficient, sir?
Thank you very much. There's also a point of clarification sought by Deputy Young.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I'm grateful for the Chief Minister. The key point I would invite him, please, to just clarify for my benefit, because I may have missed it, is he mentioned the source of the funds. I think I heard him say that the £20 million transfer to the new fund is going to be sourced from the Internet of Things dividend expected in 40 million in the comments paper. Could he just confirm that there is no intention here that transfer to the technology fund that we're debating now would include any elements for the of the technology element of the matter we just discussed, transfers from the HIF? Now, would it be just exclusively sourced from the Internet of Things? Thank you.
Well, I mean, I should probably comment on that. The word of the amendment, if passed, is entirely clear. It transfers from the consolidated fund.
Yep.
The consolidated fund is not separated in bits. It's just a transfer from the consolidated fund, which is a creature of statute. But Chief Minister, do you have anything you wish to add to that?
All I can say, so is the point is that the dividend on the Internet of Things was paid into the consolidated fund, and therefore, and was a total of 40 million. This is around 20 million of that fund being transferred, subject to a separate proposition, to a technology fund. So therefore, the if you like, substance over form, the substance of the origin of the funds will be part of the dividend that we receive from Jersey Telecoms in respect of a technology receipt, if you like, from one of our arm's length organisations.
That assists you, Deputy Young.
Sir, I think my question's off, probably not. You've dealt with it as best you can. Thank you, sir.
Very much indeed. Very well. There's Deputy St. Peter.
Oh, thank you, sir. It's been a long wait. I really struggle with this amendment. I don't really understand what's behind it. During my work on the population policy, I have ascertained quite clearly that there's been I think I can almost say, chronic previous underinvestment in technology within the government of Jersey. And I've also seen sort of poor investment in the commercial world. And I think it's quite fair to say that the culture of this island is not technology led. We aren't there. Now, I can't continue without acknowledging, because I've met some of the tech entrepreneurs over here who are doing a fantastic job, and they really are being innovative and coming up with some wonderful ideas. And I think we also have to acknowledge the work that Digital Jersey are doing, because if I don't, a certain Mr. Moretta will be on the phone in about 5 minutes. However, they're swimming against the tide. We do not have this culture. Now, I'll share this with you. There's a report from PwC recently, which uses the concept called digital density. And I think I can paraphrase digital density by saying it's the sort of percentages of tasks that could be automated that have been automated. Now, we run at 10%. Jersey runs at 10%, the fastest internet in the world, as we keep on hearing and telling ourselves, but we still have a very small percentage of our technology that we use on a day-to-day basis. Our services and the way we work is digitized. It's 10%. London, put in perspective, slightly bigger place, bigger challenges, and apparently the 41st fastest internet in the world has got 16%. We are lagging far behind the likes of Estonia and Taiwan, who are digital economies, as we know, and they're up in the 30%. We have to acknowledge we are behind, and any idea to reduce any investment going forward is just purely ludicrous in 2021. I can't go on without making reference to the Innovation Fund. I mean, anybody who looked at that on the outside, and I did because it was launched just after I moved back to Jersey, will know it was absolutely flawed from the outset. I don't know how it got through this assembly, and hopefully part 2 of this will be adopted, because we have to review these investments quite clearly. The principle of the investments, not where the money's being spent, obviously. Now, why was it fundamentally flawed? Quite simple, it was based on debt and not equity. And the way angel investors work, which is effectively what we are with the Innovation Fund, is, you know, you, let's say, for argument, you invest in 10 companies, you expect 3 or 4 to fail, 3 or 4 to wash their face, and ideally 1 or 2 will absolutely fly, where the returns are in huge multiples, which means the overall fund becomes highly lucrative. That's how they work. We didn't do that, and that's why it failed. Anyhow, and I could go on with my passion about this for a long time, but how we can even consider not withdrawing money from an innovation fund to support entrepreneurs in this island, to go in all the markets that the Chief Minister mentioned in health and our green technologies, is purely ludicrous. So I urge everybody, don't support this, but very happy to bring the fund, whatever it is, back to the Assembly in the future. Thank you very much.
Deputy Senator Walwell.
Yes, thank you, sir. I'm speaking as a member of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel that brought this amendment, and maybe I can help clarify and help particularly Deputy St Peter to understand why we brought this amendment. It's not whether we do or do not want a technology fund. Actually, it's about accountability and governance. And that's extremely important because this State Assembly approved the Public Finances Law in 2019. The 2019 Public Finances Law actually provides a certain amount of flexibility in the amount that is able to move during a year. And I'll give this as an example. So in the government plan last year, there was reference made within the government plan for a need to move funds from one department to another department in order to make sure that the funding for M&D, for technology, for health and education could be moved over, but they didn't quite know how much money would be needed at that point in time. So there was a mention in the government plan, and what Article 18 does of the Public Finances Law is enable the Minister for Treasury and Resources to manoeuvre that funding from one place to another. And there is, and if that is an issue and a problem, there is an ability for the Council of Ministers to bring forward amendment to the government plan if need be. And so on the point of sending out the right messages and sending out the right signals to industry, I'm a big believer in diversifying our industries, and I'm a big believer in diversifying, particularly in technology and the use that technology can have. So that's without argument. So I'm not going to make those arguments whether there's pros or cons against this. What I am going to make the argument about is whether we know whether that £20 million is enough or not enough. And we will only know that, sir, if and when the proposition that establishes the fund identifies the terms of reference, the requirements, the needs, and we've seen historically some of the risks that have been multiplied because of the way previous funds may or may not have been managed. And what we're purely saying here is we're sending the message in that this funding, this £20 million, will not be available to anybody come the 1st of January in 2022. This funding will only be available to industry once that proposition establishing the fund is brought to the Assembly. If we wanted to send the appropriate message to industry, that fund should have been brought as a proposition alongside of the government plan, establishing it, identifying the appropriate accountability and the appropriate governance. The argument of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel on this basis is not if, when or how or what that technology fund may or may not look like. What we're asking is that the State Assembly back up their agreement to what we have in terms of governance and accountability. We make sure we know what we're voting for, and that we hear many times, and I'm sure we're going to hear it in other amendments, we need evidence, we need proof, we need data, we need information. We can't just be signing off £20 million at a flick of a tick without actually having the appropriate information. So, sir, that's why the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel brought the amendment that they have. It's not because we don't support industry. It's not because we don't believe it's the appropriate way to do things, but we do believe in making sure that when we have these funds in place, the accountability and the governance that sits around it accords with the appropriate risk management and the appropriate expectations of public funds expenditure. That £20 million will sit in the consolidated fund, and there is flexibility and there is an ability under the Public Finances Law to make that move once the fund is established. So, sir, I hope that by me explaining this as clearly as I possibly can around the rules and roles of the Public Finances Law and the roles of accountability and governance that we expect as a States Assembly, that people better understand why this amendment was brought, and hopefully will support us in that endeavour. And we look forward, we absolutely look forward to seeing the fund proposition, establishing a technology fund, and applying the requisite expectations for that fund so that everybody knows where they stand and when they can access those monies. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Senator Deputy Pinnell.
Thank you, sir. This is really just very briefly, if I can, to address the questions of the previous speaker, Senator Valois, and of course, her representation of the panel. As the Chief Minister has already said, the £20 million proposed to be ring-fenced for the Technology Fund has come from the £40 million one-off dividend paid by JT to its shareholder as a result of the sale of its international IoT business. To try to answer some of the Senator's questions on a timeline, we will be publishing a discussion paper before the end of January for 4 weeks, input from all stakeholders, which will include, obviously, businesses, as mentioned. We will then review the input and develop the proposition for lodging in mid-March for this proposition to come before the Assembly. And then, providing ministers agree and a date time can be secured, we would want to debate the proposition in late April before the start of the pre-election period. I hope this answers some of the Senator's questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak?
Sir, I posted in the chat. I'm not sure if you can see it.
Yes, thank you very much. Deputy Gardner, it's just appeared.
Thank you, sir. And it's again briefly follow my point of clarifications. I think if I got it correct, it is an option to bring a proposition which would include an amount, which is 20 million, we discussed today, in later day, in April. And I'm grateful for the Senator Valois because it is about accountability and governance. It's not against establishing technology fund. And for me, the struggle was because I do believe we need technology fund. I do believe we need to invest to develop this industry as the next big industry, hopefully on the island. At the same time, we have not great record with governance and accountability and management of the funds. And for me, not to know what will be the governance, the risk assessments, selection of the procedures, manpower, financial arrangements to the funds to deliver, there are important questions that needs to be answered. I wish we would debate these matters today, as Senator suggested, as a standalone proposition, 20 million for consolidated fund, alongside with the governance arrangements. So I hope I got it right. It is an option to bring the proposition back to the Assembly, which will include 20 million and will be justifications how we are going to spend it going forward. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Deputies, any other member wish to speak? Colin Tarbison, John.
Thank you, sir. And I'd like to thank Senator Volwa for reminding us why we're looking at this proposition. It's about governance. So we own JT, 100% of JT, and we received £40 million as a special dividend. That means that JT retained significant funds to invest in technology for their infrastructure, and also to invest in the next IoT of things or whatever that may be. But significant amount of money has been retained for technology. £40 million was the dividend we got from the states, from JT. £20 million of that has been identified to invest in government IT programs. And whilst I'll agree with the Deputy of St. Peter that we need to do much better with technology within the government, I'd also remind him that we appear to be spending money like water without seeing results in technology. We are on an island, we call ourselves Digital Jersey, and there are many, many basic things we can't do, which we should be able to do. We heard about angel investments, the Innovation Fund. Well, let's see the detail. I'm disappointed the Council of Ministers haven't accepted this proposal, because it seems to me we all want to get behind the digital technology. We all want to get behind the future. So why not accept this proposal and come back, as the Treasury Minister said in April, with a proposal giving us, the members, details on how we can spend the money wisely. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Colin Tarb. Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. Unfortunately, and I have to agree with the Constable Saint-Jean here, is that unfortunately the government is not good at technology. That's something that has been proven over many, many, many years. So I'm not speaking politically about this government. I'm speaking about Jersey's government as a whole over the last 15 to 20 years has proven itself to be not good at technology. But the truth is, we need technology in this island. We need technology to help us move to net zero. We need technology to help us minimize growth in the size of government. We need technology to help us improve healthcare. We need technology at the end of the day to help us keep taxes down, because otherwise we're just going to have to keep hiring more and more and more people. Technology is our only real option to avoid that. So if government can't be trusted to deliver technology that helps us transform this island, we need the private sector to do that for us. And I think we've got one superb example of a private sector company that has taken a massive risk, brought in technology to help us address our transport issues. In this case, I'm talking about EVs, which with its bikes and its cars is challenging the idea of private vehicle ownership. And it's doing that through technology, and it's done it off its own back. That's the sort of company that I would like to see brought into, brought into the fold, so to speak, to help us transform the island. For me, therefore, a technology fund is going to be incredibly important in delivering that. And I think it's right that the government identifies here and now that £10 million will be put into that technology fund from this government plan. So I think it's right that this government plan does identify that. Even more important, though, is that we do have an actual debate on the terms of reference of that fund, on the size of that fund, on the types of objectives of that fund. Because for me, that fund should be not about trying to find companies that could become very wealthy companies by exporting a technology to the rest of the world. The fund should be focused on supporting companies or helping provide funding to companies that are going to help us transform this island. That, to me, should be the clear terms of reference of that fund. All the technology that it invests in is to be useful in this island, to help us address the challenges, whether it's population, whether it's transport, whether it's net zero, whether it's healthcare. That's what it will do. And so, sir, I can't support the first part of this proposition because I do believe we need a technology fund. everything that's been said about governance is absolutely correct, because we have seen in the past how funds have been set up and haven't been governed, the governance hasn't been correct. But that should not be linked to the idea that those funds were failures. It's really important to note that with the Innovation Fund, which is oft quoted, it actually was an overall success in terms of the businesses it supported, but it had some notable failures, and those failures, one of them at least, was due to very poor governance, and that can't be allowed. So when this, I hope this does come back to us in the next couple of months, I'm looking for it to be a fund that is focused very much on solving the island's problems through the use of technology, and that it has a robust governance structure which enables it to provide funding to the requisite businesses that we need, but in a way that is responsible. It shouldn't be slowed down, because another thing, it's always a balance. Another thing is you can't bog something down in such bureaucracy that it never actually pays out any money to any businesses at the other side of it. So I won't be supporting the first part of this proposition, but I will be supporting the second, because it's a really important second part of the proposition. And I thank the panel for bringing that. And to be honest, I encourage all states members to take that route. Reject the first part of the proposition, because we do need a technology fund, but accept the second part of the proposition, because it does need to be debated and spoken about. Thank you, sir.
May I propose the adjournment?
Yes, the adjournment is proposed. It doesn't seem to be too early. Objects? Very well. The Assembly will stand adjourned until 2:15.